yours, this is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Tuesday, April 14th, 2015 work session. And first on our agenda is a presentation about a supplemental budget request from the Healthy Rivers Fund, and Lisa McDonald will take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa McDonald. I am one of the staff liaisons for the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board. Today with me I have two of the River Board members, Ruthie Brown and Lisa Tasker, joining us along with Heather Lewin with the Roaring Fork Conservancy. Heather is the Conservancy's Watershed Action Director, and she submitted the grant request that's in front of you today for the Didymo study. The request is for $10,000 for further study, actually, on the Didymo that's been found in the Frying Pan River. The River Board unanimously approved the grant request at its meeting last month, and included in your packet today is the cumulative spreadsheet, and along with any written board comments that were submitted. I can let Heather take it from here. She's going to do a short video and a little update regarding the Didymo algae and answer any questions you guys might have. And Ruthie and Lisa are also available to answer any questions you have about the River Board's decision to grant the funding. So let Heather take it.
Thank you for hearing our request today. So what we wanted to share with you just quickly is this update on our Didymo study on the frying pan. This started around this time last year with the first round of study as part of our comprehensive lower frying pan assessment, which included looking at Didymo along with dipper populations, macroinvertebrates, and an economic study. That was also a component of it, and just to looking at overall health of the frying pan river and fishery. So Didymo has become one of the more talked about pieces of this study. If you aren't familiar with it, Didymo is a freshwater diatom. It's an algae that forms these long, nasty stalks and mats. It is native to Colorado, so it's not an invasive species, but it is considered a nuisance species at this point because it's spreading at a higher rate, growing faster. And is more prolific in areas where it might not have been seen before. So there's a lot of unknowns surrounding Didymo. It lives in areas where you don't generally find algae. It lives in what you normally think of as healthy stream areas. So low nutrient, cold water streams are where you tend to find high Didymo populations. The concern is Didymo attaches to substrates in the river, mostly rocks and other things in the bottom of the river, and it takes up the same habitat as a lot of the macroinvertebrates, particularly those high-quality macroinvertebrates that we want to see in a good fishery. So there's a concern as Didymo populations increase, that you see a decrease in macroinvertebrate populations, which in turn is detrimental to fish populations. We're looking at Didymo present in plus or minus about 20% of Colorado streams. And we're kind of on the earlier end of these studies. We're working with some of the experts, top experts in Boulder and that area, sharing information with them, sharing our results, learning more from them as more information from them becomes available. So for the study last summer, we partnered with CMC in Leadville to perform the study, their natural resource management program. And they made a quick video for us that I think really gives you the best Didymo picture. I'm going to share that with you now.
The Roaring Fork Conservancy approached Colorado Mountain College in Leadville and the Natural Resource Management Program with the project proposal to study Didymo on the Frying Pan River. Didymo is kind of like a white fuzzy. It almost looks like wet tissue paper or toilet paper floating through the water. Really nasty.
It looks like just white snot.
covering the rocks at the bottom of the river.
See if we can reload.
It's going okay.
The bottom of the river. It's really gross, stringy, and very slimy.
It's an algae that is native over in the little frying pan.
See, the picture seems to have frozen there.
Oh, we had moving sound but not moving picture.
Covering the rocks at the bottom of the river. It's really gross, stringy, and very slimy.
It's an algae that is native over in the little frying pan river. However, it's becoming an explosive problem. Didymo is covering all possible rock surface area for aquatic life, for fish to feed.
And what they're really concerned with is this whole comprehensive study of how Didymo could be impacting the gold medal water in their fishery.
Overall, we're going to see a continual decrease in the fish population because they have less and less food to eat.
Just choking out the habitat, making it harder for fishermen, the fish, all life form really that inhabit the river.
The fishery here on the Frying Pan River is world class, and it brings anglers from all over the country and the world.
The Frying Pan River is a gold medal fishery site, which means it's a very popular and well protected fishing area. It's very important to make sure that your waders are washed and dried when exiting and before entering any river or body of water, because this Didymo can be spread just attached to your waders.
The natural resource management students are here to study the Didymo problem. They're out using water quality probes, a viewing bucket, and different volumetric algae sampling techniques to quantify how much Didymo is in the stream.
We are getting kind of base data, getting volumes, percentages in the river, just kind of really taking good observations and doing the more simpler science. There's definitely less Didymo lower down as you get towards the salt. The difference that we've noticed has been a lesser CFS coming out of this dam.
Right here on the left, this is a rock, a clean rock without any Didymo on it. This is what rocks should look like in the river. Here on the right, you see a rock covered in Didymo. It's very thickly matted on there. You can see how thick it is. And it obviously doesn't look like this.
We're going out 3 times this year, in the spring, the summer, and the fall. 2 weeks ago, the Bureau of Reclamation released really high flows out of the dam, which is just upstream from here. It tended to scour the stream. And we're seeing a drastic change in the volume of Didymo that's clinging to the rocks. So the scour may have helped clean some of the problem off of the rocks.
I feel like the data that I've helped collect it will be used to try and mitigate Didymo in other parts of the state.
Simply to be a paid student here working on stuff that we do in the classroom already is a big deal for me.
I chose to participate in it because they haven't really done advanced research in it, so it's just kind of like we're the first people to get our foot in the door.
Knowledge learned in wetlands classes and entomology classes and ecology classes, the students apply for the work that they're doing out here on the river for the Conservancy.
Nowhere else other than CMC have I found a close niche where you can actually speak to your professors, you can learn directly from the clients we work with, and being a sophomore in college to have a direct impact on the Roaring Fork Conservancy. That's a big deal for me. You're outdoors, you're not in a classroom learning out of a book. We're here taking samples out of the river.
So that's the first round, kind of a field study in a nutshell. So after taking all that back and analyzing the results, basically we found that basically as we would expect, we saw the most Didymo early in the season when they sampled before high water. After high water, as I mentioned in the video, you saw less. There's sort of a scouring effect. If you get the water moving fast enough, either it can pull the dynamo itself, or it can roll the rocks and literally move dynamo off, almost clean them off that way. If you've been up the frying pan, you know that there aren't a lot of those nice round river rocks that scour nicely and roll nicely like you might see in the Roaring Fork. So you almost, it might not have, the high flows might not have as much of an effect, but certainly are important, and they did see a significant decrease after that. And the interesting piece happened at the end of the season. So after looking at early season, just following peak flow, we went back in the fall and found almost no dynamo at all at the end of the season. And that was surprising to the group at CMC. It was surprising to us. And we're not totally sure why that is. We've again talked with groups and experts to try and figure out if there's a seasonality to dynamo blooms. Is it normal? Does it normally peak in the spring and dissipate and then reappear again? Or did something change that made it come or go the way that it did? And so that's one of the big reasons that we're hoping to perform this supplemental study, to basically go through and repeat the study again. We want to try and establish a pattern, to try and figure out whether what happened last summer is the normal pattern, or whether that was an anomaly. You sort of use the analogy, you know, if you came to Aspen this year in February and you said, oh, well, it's always 50 degrees and sunny in Aspen in February. So 1 year of data doesn't always give you the big picture. And so that's why we really think we need to go back and look at this again. The idea of putting together the study and gaining a better understanding is to help drive some best management practices. We've been in talks with the BOR and some groups on the best way to use flows to help mitigate issues like this. And the other piece, as you heard in the video again, is working with anglers and other river users to make sure that we're cleaning waders and boots as people come in and out of the river. Not only as you transfer rivers, but maybe as you transfer parts of the river, right? So as you go from up by the dam where you know there is a lot of dynamo, and then maybe you move and fish later in the day in another spot, whether it's lower in the frying pan or in the Roaring Fork, that really you should be cleaning your gear between those visits up and down the stream, because it doesn't take very much to spread dynamo. It spreads really quick. You can see in the picture there, we've partnered with the Roaring Fork Fly Fishing Club to put together a mobile wader washing station. So basically they're out there, or members of their group are out there almost every day on the frying pan throughout the summer. Rather than having a set facility, they basically set this up on the back of their truck with a nice poster on the back. You've got rock snot. Leave the gear and the brushes and the wash out there that your people are able to come through and use that through the course of the day. So that's kind of our first step process, and we hope to build on that. The next piece is the budget. So estimated total cost is $20,000. Eagle County is currently funding half the project. They've given us $10,000 through their community grants, and we're hoping that Picken County will be willing to partner in the other half of this. Any dynamo or other questions I can?
Rachel.
Yeah, well, first I'd like to thank you for your constant participation with the 1177 groups and really bringing the non-consumptive needs forward in a big manner for just our basin but beyond, so really appreciate that. And I was going to ask two questions really, but the work that they're doing, they are then correlating it with Bureau of Reclamation releases and temperature and pH of the water and all those sort of factors.
Yes, so they're basically at each study site, and there's 20 sites down the river that they're using, they sample a site twice as long as the river is wide at that point. And from there they do a visual, you saw them with the viewing bucket there, to try and get a visual percentage of coverage in using the bucket. They're also taking those water quality measurements that you mentioned. So then there's a correlation to location, to water quality, to flows. And we do have temperature probes that are in the river for the bigger piece of this study. So they're taking temperature measurements at 3 spots along the river once an hour. Mm-hmm. And so we've been able to log temperature yearly using those electronic measurements. And so all that comes together to kind of start to give us a picture. And another piece we're looking to add into this study is angler access points. So is there a correlation between high Didymo and high angler use?
That makes sense.
We're seeing that at the dam, and the general thought was it had to do with the releases out of the dam, how much water was flowing there, but we want to look a little bit more at, that's also the busiest fishing area. So is there a correlation? Is it just the flows out of the dam, or does it also have to do with people moving?
Well, I'm supportive of this grant. I appreciate your work, and what particularly strikes me is the nice partnerships you've put together using our local community college availability, and certainly with Eagle County and so on, caring for that river. I think it's important, as we all know, that Rudai contains contract water, which has been sold for the most part to pay off the Rudai debt, and the call regime on that can fluctuate fairly widely in the future. We're having a meeting tonight with some representatives of the CWCB about a new lease for water that could help the endangered fish, but it's really about how and when it's called. And so I think that this information will be really valuable for as we look at those future releases and how Bureau of Reclamation manages those. And one way or the other, you have to make a good case. It seems to be not just that, well, basalt loses its economy for 2 months because of high flows or the river's being turned into a flume, but how does it affect the ecology of the river? And so I think that this is good work, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I too am very supportive, and I think you're absolutely right about the snapshot in time. You need lots of those snapshots to put together the whole picture. I do have one technical question. What do you wash your gear with? Just soap or water, or just water and a brush?
There's I'm not sure what the exact concoction they're using. Definitely having water and a brush is a good start.
Right.
Because you'll scrub off most of.
Right, just from the
I'm
abrasive.
not sure what they've got exactly in there, to be honest with you. I can find out. and let you
Yeah,
know.
well, I bet Trevor probably knows. Just a question, I want to make sure he knows.
George?
So when you're talking about looking at different site locations, and initially it looks like the scouring could help in terms of getting rid of the Didymo on the rocks. So when you're coming out of the dam, I would have suspected that you'd have less Didymo there because you've got that water coming out of the dam and other fast-moving sections of the river versus some of the quieter sections.
Didymo is an interesting study in that it likes a certain amount of movement in the water. It actually doesn't grow well in still water. So there's a certain amount of movement that's beneficial. And I don't know that I can answer you for certain, but my best guess is the way the river's made up, where it's wide and where it's narrow, so how that water's dissipated in the space just below the dam is kind of a wider, longer stretch. So where it's moving through, it's a fair question. But it does, there have been other studies done looking in Colorado and other mountain states that show Didymo tends to thrive just below dam releases. And I think it's some of it is the consistency of those flows moving through, that you do see some high and low water moving through there, but there is often a very consistent flow that seems to be.
So does that mean they also like colder water as well?
It's a cold water, low nutrient, slow moving, where you would generally say this is a perfectly healthy stream, this is a great spot. You don't see a lot of other issues with algae, things like algae blooms or the other things that you associate with algae blooms.
Yeah, so I guess back to the point in terms of taking care of your waders, because that section right below the dam is probably the most heavily used section. It's kind of like you always feel sorry for the fish. It's probably like going through a gauntlet to get through those fishermen.
It's true.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for the fishermen, they're all like,
Yeah, so that wader washing station should be in that area most of the summer.
Yeah.
I think that's where they spend most of their time. So that is a great addition there. And if you stop to wash your waders, that's the best. But if nothing else, hopefully it brings a little bit of awareness to when you make that stop. What's in this river? Why is it there? Why do I want to wash my gear? And it really is a good practice, not just for Didymo, but overall.
And while you're doing those studies, I'm sure you're still continuing to see the studies or following the zebra mussels.
So yeah, they haven't, to my understanding, yet found any zebra mussels in Rudai and in that area. The strange part about the way that federal funding works is that you need to have zebra mussels to fund zebra mussels.
No preventative medicine.
That's probably the good news, right?
Well,
That we don't.
it would be great to have a little more funding for
Yeah.
prevention rather than the after the fact. But the good news is they have not found zebra mussels in there yet. And they do have an intensive boat washing program up there that goes on through the summer.
Yeah. Thanks.
Heather, do you test up above Rudai Reservoir also?
Yeah, they did test some of the inlet streams there, and what they found was presence of Didymo that, if I recall, was not visually detected, but they found microscopically. So it is present there, but not at those nuisance levels that we're seeing below the dam. So I guess some of it begs the question now, is it native there, which I think was the general thought, or is it something that's been transferred from the lower part of the river to the upper part of the river by people? And it's hard to know for sure.
And at the study sites, are you measuring the velocity of the water on the days when you were there doing the testing?
We have the flows from the site, from the dam release. So we don't necessarily have the site-specific flow, I don't believe, but we do have flow, the daily flow on the river from the dam, and we can sort of make some assumptions from there.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe in this summer study it might be something to consider. There's hydrologists have a little thing they can put in the water that has a little thing that turns around.
Yep,
Just measures
we have one of those too.
the velocity.
Yeah, it's
Because if there is a correlation with the scouring, sending it downstream somewhere, to the velocity of the water as well as the temperature of the water, would be interesting to, you would actually have to record the velocity at each site to be able to see if there's a correlation there.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
And does the stuff that gets washed downstream in the scouring, does it grab onto rocks somewhere else downstream, or does it just go all the way to somebody's
California.
field or Lake Powell or what?
Right, well, I think the hope is that, if the frying pan's running high, chances are the Roaring Fork's running high and the Colorado's running high, so that it's just going to move out. And then when it gets to the point where you're in still water, it doesn't grow anymore. So I guess maybe that's the ideal situation. We haven't done any studies on the Roaring Fork. We use a lot of anecdotal evidence. We have a lot of anglers, as you know, that are out there all the time and every day, and we haven't heard of the Didymo on the fork the same way we had on the frying pan.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I totally support funding the study for this summer. Any sort of a scientific study I'm really interested in. And it sounds like, the Frying Pan River could be potentially in jeopardy of being a gold medal fishery because of this. So if we can learn more about it and maybe be able to keep the river healthier, that would be good.
Exactly.
Lisa Tasker has her hand up.
Yeah, exactly. Lisa T and Lisa M. Heather didn't mention, she did mention that obviously the Conservancy is very connected with other researchers, and one in particular that I just wanted to bring up was Brad Taylor from Dartmouth, who's been doing a lot of work over at RMBL, the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory over in Gothic, and just reviewing the Country News article this morning. I don't know if it's anecdotal or if he actually has data, but they have been observing over there that on warmer springs, when they have earlier runoff and less runoff, there's obviously bigger blooms. And so I think that actually what they did say is they really don't have data and they need to have data. And I think your work is really going to help, perhaps support, the big high flushing flows that we need in the spring and help with the Rudai release arguments and that kind of thing. So that's just one thing I wanted to add to this.
That's the hope. We haven't been in touch with Brad Taylor. Him in particular. We have talked to the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. We have plans to go over there this summer and participate in their poster session using this study, so to share some information, to share what we found, but also to learn from folks in the research that's being done there as well.
Rachel?
Yeah, just one other question, two-part question. What are the high-value macroinvertebrates for our education and the public? And then, is this also being correlated with the study you had done not long ago about the amount of the of the macroinvertebrates and how that affects the fishery?
Yeah, so high-quality macroinvertebrates that we're looking for in fisheries are stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies are the kind of the big three. We did do a correlated macroinvertebrate study last year, so the fall of 2013 and spring of 2014. Collected macroinvertebrate samples and compared those to a study. The last macroinvertebrate sampling there was about 10 years prior, so we repeated the same spaces in those studies, and we didn't see a significant decrease in macroinvertebrate populations. So we're still looking at healthy macro populations in those areas.
That's really good information, because for a while there, before that study was done, there was a lot of kind of anecdotal that there's less, and you know what's causing it and so on, and kind of goes to show you really have to work off data, not a few stories. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, and one other thing along that is that they discussed at RMBL that it's the larger macroinvertebrates that tend to get stuck in the rock snot and the didymo, and the smaller ones tend to be able to elude it. And so the idea was that there's going to be less food available for fish because that's happening. And we may have some data on that. I can't recall. But anyway, that was another part of it. It was just actual, the structural size of the high-quality macroinvertebrates versus the tiny ones that were getting
So
through.
yeah, a lot of what's out there right now is we're seeing correlation between higher aquatic worm and those other sort of what's considered lower quality macroinvertebrate populations, not as good fish food, not as good, generally show poor water quality. Those are the ones that thrive in those digital populations, but I think you're right, a lot of it is probably size, those are the littler ones versus the bigger kind of meaty ones that you want to see in a good fishing area.
Thank you.
Okay, could we get a thumbs up from
Oh, yeah.
board to support this? Nod?
Okay.
Okay.
And then next year, we'll get to see the next session of data.
Happy to share that all day. All right, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Heather. Okay, next we have Snowmass Creek and Capitol Creek supplemental budget request, and this is for road stuff, and GR Fielding is here from the engineering department.
Thanks, Steve. Again, I'm GR Fielding. I'm the county engineer. And today before you is a budget supplemental request, and this supplemental request is a little bit different than what the board usually sees, because I'm not looking to get any more money allocated out of the general fund into the road program. I'm looking to move money that's in that road capital maintenance program into a specific project. And how that's working is from the 2013 and 2014 road capital projects, we have a savings of in the tune of between $1 and $1.1 million. And what we're proposing to do here is a small increase in scope of the project. We did have a little bit of, the prices increased a little bit this year as well, and we'd like to work with a little bit of contingency. It's always nice because you open up the world and sometimes you don't know what you're going to find. So what we're proposing to do is take $250,000 out of that savings and move it into this project. That would leave us with just shy of $820,000 that would still be in savings from those various projects. The project that's proposed for Snowmass and Capitol Creek roads includes patching. So along Capitol Creek Road and a couple areas of Snowmass Creek Road, we're losing the shoulders, or we have a little bit of higher distressed areas. So we'll go back and patch those areas back. We'll do where we have some rippling or some rutting in the road, we'll do a couple small overlay sections. And then on top of the entire stretch that is paved currently, we will be doing what's becoming our signature double chip seal, as those are pretty high use for recreational cyclists.
So,
And
go ahead.
that's the same system you used that you got such glorious reviews on. Was it up the frying pan?
Yes, we did. We've used that on the Frying Pan, McLean
McLean
Flats,
Flats.
and Upper River Road.
So, GR, you're going to do the overlay starting pretty much by the Y, where Snowmass Creek and Capitol connect, and going up to pavement end?
The overlays, the overlay sections are pretty sporadic, and they're shorter sections, and they're more localized because we might see a higher distressed area. And what we've looked at doing is doing a little exploratory digging to make sure that we don't need to put an under drain or something in there because of boggy area or wet area adjacent to the road. And then the chip seal will start at State Highway 82, go up to the Y, and go both directions out to the end of oil.
And when will the project start?
Well, we're waiting to get the money allocated so we can enter into contract and negotiate on that timing. It'll be this summer. I believe the paving and chip seal portion last summer of Frying Pan, which was a very similar scope to this, took about 2.5 to 3 weeks to complete in total. We'll put out our variable message signs and get on the radio and that and do our normal outreach to let people know once we have those dates from the contractor.
Great.
One other note too is we just got the Aspen Cycling Club's schedule, and we usually like to work with those folks if they have any events going on up in that area, and a couple of the other user groups too.
They'll probably want to wait till all the work is done.
Does this mean I can't have my Porsche convention during the construction time?
You can.
You certainly can, and if I could have your cell phone number there, that'd be great.
It sounds good to me.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm probably the one who will be the most impacted by this stuff.
Yeah, you and all your Porsches.
Just to describe the experience of driving up and down the road there's a lot of places on the shoulder that have been scraped off by the maintainer is basically what happened. And so if you meet a car that's coming along, and they tend to go into the middle of the road to avoid going into the bumps along the side, and so I've gotten in the habit of going to the right off halfway onto the shoulder to avoid like hitting these big bumps that are along the way. So it actually creates a dangerous situation because it's unpredictable which way somebody's going to go to avoid the rough spots. So this definitely will make it a lot safer situation having a even road surface clear across.
And that's precisely why we want to go through and do all of that edge patching. And it really, at points, you're really dealing with a 1.5 or 1 3/4 lane road as opposed to a full 2-lane road.
GR, how much will this raise the surface of the road?
Really, we're only looking at about 3/4 of an inch change, which will be good in some areas as some of the vegetation and has grown up off the side of the road and the shoulders become a little bit higher. In a couple areas where we have a nice even shoulder off the side, we'll look at catching up those shoulders with a little bit of material. It won't be enough to make any drastic changes at any of the intersections or driveways or anything like that.
Okay. And there's one place that is like a heave in a swampy area that tends to heave up in the spring and then drop back down just, shortly before the end of the pavement on Capitol Creek. And do you do anything different in an area like that? Like, do you have to put fabric under there, or something?
Well, what's causing the heaving is freeze thaw, usually of water, and so we do have planned some under drains and a couple other techniques to try to keep some of that water from coming underneath the road. And if we can get that water out from underneath the road, we can hopefully avoid in the future doing the more costly repair of digging down about 3 feet and rebuilding an entire section of the road.
Michael?
Chair, this is just a general question, but when you ask for $250,000 for a project like this, how do you prevent contractors from bidding at that $250,000 level?
That's a great question, Michael. And one of the, because it's a competitive system, they're trying to win the work. Our projects are now of the size that it really interests the contractors that do this type of work. And this job came in, I believe, within $40,000. There are 2 proposals. It might have been $100,000 between the 2. So they're dealing with very tight pricing. On top of that, the way our contract is structured, we have each line where we get a unit price, and we only pay for the number of units that we actually use. And so on the chip seal, we build out by this square foot, the surface area. And so if that's a fixed quantity. We've gone out and we've measured that. We're pretty, we're always within a couple % there. Some of the things, we can set the limits of some of our patching based on our budget. And so because of the nature of our funding, we're not going out and scoping the largest possible project to do all of the maintenance that's potential in an area. We're trying to follow all of the best practices to scope a project that falls within our allotted budget for a current year, and trying to balance that with other aspects that other needs throughout the county.
What's our unit price comparison to, say, Grand Junction or something like that? Is it significantly different?
I don't have a figure off the top of my head. I haven't looked at the regional pricing, but I can tell you that we're usually paying a little bit of a premium in the Roaring Fork Valley in general. Chip seals, we're only getting 2 proposers, where in Junction you might get a few more because it's a little bit more local to some of the folks that do that down there. And our contractors are based out of, between Carbondale and Silt usually. So.
And Michael, just to add on, we didn't come to this budget request before bidding out the work. It was after we bid out the work. So that's one protection. Yeah. And then the other protection is just really managing any of that change order process around the unit price. We can certainly contact and see what some of the differences are. I would expect that our costs in this valley are going to be higher for several reasons. One, we're probably moving workforce a farther distance to do the work than you are in some, like a Grand Junction area or Mesa County and that sort of thing. So you're automatically going to have higher labor costs, even if you're paying the same hourly rate, which you may not be. So I would anticipate that our costs would be higher by some level, but we don't.
Right. I was just interested, what that rate is.
Sure.
What that margin is. I would expect there to be a margin too. So, great. One other question was, how do you spec this? How do you spec overlay? What are you looking for when somebody lays that, sort of Ben and Jerry's double chip layer? What's your specification and how do you check on it?
Well, a significant portion of our check comes prior to the material even showing up on site. The chip is specified at a nominal size, and so the chip needs to be a very specific size, and our double chip has a larger aggregate on the bottom, That's usually either a 5/8 or a 1/2 inch, and then a smaller aggregate, which is either a 3/8 or a 1/4 inch on the top. And that's what gives it a smoother job. We do several tests on that aggregate prior from the pit. We look at the gradation to make sure it's the right size. We do abrasion test. That abrasion tests ensure that it's hard. It's a harder rock, and so it doesn't fracture as easy and it holds up to traffic. We test the asphalt emulsion to ensure that it performs in temperature grades as it's specified, and in those sorts of things we adopt the specifications that the state highway department sets forth. And as far as the asphalt, it's a similar set of tests. We test the gradation, the type of asphalt, and then we're also testing for densities and those sorts of things of what's in place.
So if a contractor doesn't meet those specifications after the fact, I mean, they've laid, you did your samples before, but they put in something different. Well, what do you do?
It really depends on the how egregious it is and how far out of specification. Every specification has a range, and you have tolerances even outside of that range where there may be a negotiation between staff and the contractor to reduce the price that the county is paying for that asphalt, because a lot of times it's not worth it to do the work again. You're going to get some performance out of it, but probably not the same length. It gets a little theoretical past that of what, I can't say, oh, that's supposed to last 8 years and now it's only going to last 6. We don't know what that number is. So sometimes doing that price negotiation underneath what was originally agreed to is our best route. And there has been times where we have made the contractor remove and replace work on their own dollar because it did not meet our specifications.
Thank you, Chair.
Sort of a sideline as long as you're here. I haven't been up West Cypress in a while. Is that section near the top being repatched that was sort of torn up from the construction from the large trucks going into that big house up there?
The last time I was up West Cypress, I have to be honest, it was either really dark or I was really tired because I went up and skied Cypress. But we can go up and take a look. I don't remember. I know the project, an area that you're talking about, and I think we got a decent patch back there before winter, and so far this spring, from my understanding, it's held up.
Yeah, because I noticed starting from Cypress Mountain Ranch heading up, that road was really deteriorating and getting a lot of potholes, and probably from that same heavy truck traffic.
We'll take a look at that, George.
You nods.
Yeah, I was counting nods here.
I nodded.
When we nod, it doesn't mean we're falling asleep.
Okay.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
Means we're waking up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Let's see, future agendas. John.
Yeah, just a number of items for you. Start off with the easy ones. On April 21st, we had a work session item to go over the landfill RFPs. We do have those in. I think we're going to need a little bit more time to evaluate them, so we're going to move that to another date, and we're going to need to do a little bit more work to know what that date is, but do not expect to see that on the April 21st agenda.
Well, RFPs for what, John?
That is for operation of the landfill. So we're
So this is the general contract?
Yeah, this is the general contract. The next two items, the next day, April 22nd, you'll see that we're working through having the consent and individual consideration items again. We're going to be matching up the items that we're on for individual consideration, again for individual consideration and public hearing. So we'll be moving items 5 and 6 from what are currently consent public hearings to individual consideration public hearings. And then on that same day, item 7, I cannot remember what that was at this point, but item 7, which is the resolution amending the memorandum of understanding between Eagle, Gunnison, and Pickens counties on the Energy Smart program. It sounds like that is not going to be ready for that meeting, and we'll be moving it to the next regular meeting.
John, you actually have that twice. That you have it under consent items number 6, and then you have it under individual consideration items number 7. It's the same one. Right? So.
And it probably shouldn't be under either.
Take it up.
Unless, Cindy, you have an update on
And
that?
I just left a meeting, negotiations with the Bronze and Elam Construction, and we don't think that we're going to be able to make the April 22nd meeting, which we had scheduled. If the board would consider, we'd like to move that out a month so that we can work on a couple detailed.
Didn't you continue that to a date certain, though? So we'd need to come back and open it and continue it again at that point, I think.
But it won't be on a full agenda.
Right, right.
Okay.
So we'll need to have it on the agenda and then just continue it.
Yeah.
So we have time for other things.
And I have this resolution brought forward from the workforce, the resolution appointing the members. Can we put that out on the 22nd?
We probably could.
That was a meeting that I had with what they call the LEOs, the local elected officials, had to appoint a CLEO, a CLEO, a chief elected official, that was part of this workforce, rural resort regions workforce. And there's a resolution that all the individual boards of county commissioners need to approve that just appoints these memberships.
Yeah, and
You've done it in the past. It's new to me, but not
yeah,
to you.
you guys see this resolution every year, and it comes with a long list of appointees from
All the different
all the counties. And so we do have that in right now.
Because I have a
We
copy
can
right
get
here.
it
You should have
scheduled.
received it.
Yep, we got it.
Great.
We got
So
it.
that's the only thing I have to put on for that meeting.
I'm still going through my list here, though. Let me. So May 19th, we have our Health and Human Services and our Health, Board of Health, and Board of Human Services meetings. Those we're probably gonna have to figure out how to post differently because those are special meetings. And as we had talked to the new Board of Health members since we expanded it, they had either wanted to meet at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. Either way, when we have those meetings, those typically take up about 2 hours between the two of them, which is not what's currently on the schedule. What I wanted to talk to the board about was, could we start the meeting earlier on those days, and or should we look at, instead of doing a special meeting around a work session, do we want to add those on to a regular meeting agenda, and again probably start earlier and schedule those towards the end of the day.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that in general, but that particular day, right now, you've got an exec session starting at 10 for 2 hours. So maybe we can move that exec session.
Yeah, and we don't have the items. Yeah, we don't have the items scheduled at this point, so we'd look at probably compressing that. It's possible we'd start at 9 or 10 though, and go the whole day. And I just wanted to check in with the board if we started scheduling that way, if you're okay. Basically, with starting a little bit earlier if need be. We may get to that date and not need that extra time.
I won't be there for that individual one, but.
So you're fine.
Yeah, I'm fine, that's really good. But
Work as much as you want.
if needed in the future, I'm flexible, and I agree with George's concept of, flipping the executive session to later in the day. It did sound like more people wanted it at the beginning of the day, as I recall
That's
that
what,
meeting.
yeah.
Yeah, so that then, those who have to work down Valley wouldn't be coming up and going back down and things like that.
Okay. Well, we will work on redoing that. ComDev is, and there's probably going to be a better way to do this. Maybe we can have you guys give Charlotte dates, but we want to get a few dates together or times together for the requested site visit to the Nakagawa facility. That was on your last regular meeting agenda. Under land use items, the board at that time requested a site visit before the item came back. We're trying to coordinate with 4 other parties, so we wanted to maybe have a couple times that the board might be available for that site visit. We can either try and work out, Cindy, I did not get from Mike a target time frame for this when we're bringing it back. Okay.
My suggestion would be to see if we can work it in on Tuesday, April 21st, since the landfill discussion has kind of gone away, and have that out of the way sooner.
A site visit?
Yeah.
In the
On
morning?
the Tuesday at the work session.
If you drive by the site right now, it looks beautiful. It's all in bloom.
Yeah, but we want to walk the grounds and look at the I mean, right now you have us starting at 12.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it seems, depending on when you want to work it in, we could do it earlier, we could do it at 12.
Would so morning, late morning on the 21st, how does that look for everyone?
So far, so good for me. Just depends on what Mike Kramer's thinking.
And then what about either that Thursday or Friday that same week if we needed an alternative?
I will not be in town that Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
But again, the following work session, the 28th, if it's possible to work it in the morning.
And the 24th doesn't work.
For staff, okay. Yeah, the 28th is still pretty wide open as well for our.
Would you be open then other board members on the morning of the 28th?
Yeah, I'm pretty much.
Well, any of those mornings will be fine with me.
Okay.
Especially, I mean, George and I live down that way, so it'll be easy for us to.
Meet us there.
If we do it first thing in the morning before we come up to town, that would be perfect for us.
Okay, we'll look at those dates and see if we can make those work with the parties. Let's see. Got something that's a little bit out of sync, and there's a couple ways we could address it. We are doing, planning on doing a proclamation for Child Abuse Awareness or Prevention Month, which is scheduled for next Wednesday. At the same time, there is an event happening at the Yellow Brick in the morning where we've been invited to read that proclamation on the same day. And so I guess 2 things. Would the board be open to us maybe opening up for a special meeting on Tuesday to adopt the proclamation? And are there any board members who would be willing to go the next morning to read it at the Child Abuse Prevention event
What were the dates again?
Yellow Brick? So it's April 22nd is the event at the Yellow Brick. And so we'd be looking at a special meeting maybe following our work session on the 21st just to adopt the proclamation so it can be officially read at the
I live in
event.
town, I'd be available to do that if, you know, give me enough time to get back to the regular meeting. Yeah, but I can do that.
Okay. And so we'll schedule adoption on the 21st. And that's all I've got on future agendas.
John, on the 21st is the day that is the senior volunteer lunch at noon. And if there's any way we could start the meeting at 1 o'clock instead of 12, especially given that we removed the landfill operations, maybe we could start a little bit later and then I could go for a while to the senior volunteer lunch.
We did just talk about the site visit that morning though too.
Yeah, yeah. So keep that, I mean, I guess Rachel could always chair until I get there if for some reason I do that. But I mean, I feel like my main first obligation's to be here and skip something else if necessary. But if that can be worked out, I'd appreciate that. Okay.
I would just want to make, it's hard to start making adjustments if someone has another ancillary meeting they want to attend and sort of changes the rest of the meetings for the rest of the board. If it works, it's great, but if we're trying to schedule a site visit in the morning, and then I don't want to have a large gap in between, and then we have a meeting where there are healthy rivers and streams in the afternoon, it may be more difficult. So I think, to try to change schedules for
Well,
one board member.
typically, we don't have a meeting between noon and 1 on the average work session day.
Right, but it's just in general.
And then all of a sudden here, we do have it, so. Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, I understand what George is saying, and this is a little bit of the time of year when our agendas are just not quite as full for work sessions compared to midsummer and fall. But I think both points are valid, There's nothing like kind of cooling your heels for 2 hours when it's one thing for me, I have a home to go back to and can email, and these guys just have to sit in the office. So I understand both points. I'll let John try to find the right balance. The two things I'd just like to note for the future agenda is we have talked about sending Pitkin County specific comments into the Basin Implementation Plan, which are due by May 1st. And so if the board is going to review those first, we need to get that into the schedule. I could understand and be happy if the county attorney sends it in on our behalf, but it probably would be good to make sure we have those. Concurrently, we will have the joint letter with the city of Aspen that needs to be finalized and sent in as well by the 1st. And so those need to be on somewhere on our agenda that we've agreed to send those in. So those are two larger issues. And then just for this afternoon, I didn't see it on the agenda. I think Charlotte sent an email to make sure we discuss the potential letter that would be in agreement with the 3 Front Range counties of Boulder, Broomfield, and Denver, as well as Pitkin County, Summit, and Eagle, about elevating the role of land use planning in the state water plan. And John Ely, I believe, was going to bring that to us this afternoon so we could be prepared to pass at our next regular meeting. If it's just a letter and doesn't have to be passed at a regular meeting, we have a little more time, but that also has to be in by May 1st.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but at least I received a letter from Charlotte via email, so
Yeah.
it's been done.
Yeah, and I just want to, I just didn't see it on today's agenda with the new agenda format, and I just wanted to make sure we would, again, deal with that in a timely fashion.
We can talk about during open discussion, and the board, as a matter of course, has approved letters going out as part of their work session or administrative
Okay, so it doesn't
function.
have to make a regular meeting agenda. Thank you.
The last item before we move on, just with the new agenda structure, would be to look at the items that we had proposed for the 22nd on the consent agenda, again with the exception of items 5 and 6 under that consent agenda, and just to do a check-in with the board as to whether you might have questions or concerns about those being on consent versus individual consideration, or if we can plan on those being on consent and we can communicate that to the staff.
I don't have a problem with them being on consent.
So could you be, I'm sorry, we're on the 22nd.
Yeah, so on the 22nd, which is our next regular meeting.
We have, it looks like we have one item on the
Second
if you
reading.
keep go down, we also are going to have the public hearing items, Michael, because you can open a public hearing on all the items and adopt them with a single motion still. But we'd want to make sure that these are items that the board is comfortable that with staff giving a brief kind of introduction for the public and for the board as to what the items are, that there isn't a level of questioning or controversy around them, that may require more time for the board to deal with them. The object of the consent agenda is to move the non-controversial items quicker so that the board has more time to spend on those items that may require more individual consideration.
I'm okay with having them on consent.
Well, just on a matter of, it sounds a little pre-cooked to me. So, in other words, we're giving consent now to have a consent agenda that we're going to consent to. So and I understand they're here.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. But it doesn't preclude, I want to be assured that it doesn't preclude, at the last minute something becomes important to the constituency that we can pull that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Any board member can pull an item from the consent agenda at any time. This is actually an attempt for us to be a little bit more transparent about what we consider to be non-controversial and such, so that whether there is a constituency out there that wants to raise concerns, or you as a board understand there are issues, we can just plan our schedule. However, if at any time an item on consent needs further discussion or deliberation or explanation, it can be pulled at that meeting.
Right.
We're just trying to plan well.
Right, and I just don't want it to become ritualistic, where people think that local government is a ritual that we follow, rather than a participatory kind of government. That's all I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, you bring up a good point, and I was looking at these new agendas as we're working through them, particularly on the work sessions, thinking, can we shorten the verbiage that introduces each one of these little paragraphs? And I was going to say, are we paying to publish that kind of boilerplate language every time with our agenda in the paper or not? I don't know that question, but because it explains each time what a work session agenda is structured to do, and opportunity, blah, blah, blah. So, I know we're just adopting, and over time we might be able to get shorter language. But to Michael's point, it says really clearly on our agenda that consent items generally perceived as non-controversial and allow the board to spend its time on more complex items elsewhere on the agenda. A board member or member of the public may ask for a consent item to be removed for individual consideration. And so, we're even staying it on the agenda to be clear that they can be pulled.
Yeah, and I don't want to presume that staff knows when an item should necessarily be on consent or not, and we can make sure we're prepared for those items to the greatest degree possible. And Rachel, right now we are publishing all that information. It's not so much for our benefit, it's for the public's benefit. Some of the feedback that we got, or staff has gotten from folks at our meetings, is that they don't always understand what's happening at a work session versus a regular meeting, and that's why we put that in to
I know.
just...
And I'm just saying, maybe over time we can find a way to shorten it up a little, because it starts to be a lot of printed word, and we pay for printed word, and it gets repetitious after a while. But this is fine while we're introducing the new agenda format.
Okay.
That's it for future agendas for me.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Next on the agenda is a discussion about, or presentation about climate change, resiliency, and preparedness. And Cindy Hubin is going to introduce that, and we have some special guests here who are going to do the presentation.
Great. Ashley Pearl, who is the city's climate change manager, and John Katzenberger, who is the executive director for the Aspen Global Change Institute, are going to present the findings of the Aspen Climate Change Report. And this is an update report. The original report, I believe, started in 2006 and was updated in 2008, and again just now in 2014. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and John to give the report.
Do we need to turn the projector on over there or anything? Or I don't see the projector really turning up.
It should be turned on from there.
I don't know enough about it.
Cindy knows.
Cindy knows.
I'm not an expert on this. Cindy knows. Not really.
And John left the room, so.
John just left.
Yeah, he said he'd be back in a minute.
Well, doesn't turn on from over there.
There's a small device there that you can turn on.
Okay, one of those little,
Projector
there we go.
There we go.
on. Hey.
Oh,
Okay.
God, you win.
I knew Ashley could figure it out.
I knew we needed to do something.
That was going so well.
Hey,
Hey,
I think, did you press it twice? Because
I pressed it twice. Okay, we'll get started and then maybe.
Start talking, then we'll
And then
figure it
we'll-
out.
okay.
Somebody will figure it out.
Great. Hi, thanks for having us. Like Cindy said, I'm Ashley Pearl, John Katzenberger, and I work for the city. And I'm part of the Department of Environmental Health and Sustainability. So much like the county has the Environmental Health Department, we also do the same things, restaurant inspections and that sort of stuff. But part of our Environmental Health Department is also the Canary Initiative. And in that department, we oversee all things that are climate and energy related. So if you've ever worked with CORE and had an energy assessment or a free light bulb or something like that, the energy efficiency program is part of Canary. And then we oversee all the climate mitigation options. So we support RAFTA and WeCycle and CORE and all those great entities that are working to reduce greenhouse gases in the valley. And then we also publish a greenhouse gas community inventory every 3 years. So you may have seen that throughout the years, kind of tracking our footprint, saying this is how much Aspen and part of the county is contributing to global warming. So we oversee a lot of different things, but the thing we're going to talk about today is this new thing that Canary is working on, which is called resiliency planning. So that looks at the future that's coming and the way the climate is changing, and then so we're starting a conversation with the community about how we're going to prepare for that changing climate. So at the same time that we want to look at what's coming and prepare for it, we also want to continue to reduce our footprint. So Canary does kind of two things. We do the mitigation, which is reducing our footprint, and then the adaptation or the resiliency planning, which is planning for a future that's going to look different. Because no matter how hard we work and how much the global community comes together, we're still going to see an impact to our climate long into the future. So we need to start talking about that now. So that's kind of the topic for today. And we're really lucky to have John with us. John's with the Aspen Global Change Institute. Their office is in Basalt. And I don't know if you guys know the story of how Canary got started, but John was the founder and director of the AGCI. And if you guys remember John Worcester, who was the city attorney for so long, John called up John here and said, "Hey, this climate change thing, is this real? Is this something we should be worried about?" And John here said, "Well, yes, very much so." And so they actually worked together to create the Canary Initiative. Are we good?
Can I ask for a quick definition? Of something?
Yeah, Patty.
Yeah, but they have a memory stick in the computer here. Too. So they both have to be on.
Hey.
Yeah.
Somehow, I don't know how that got turned off. That got turned off.
Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you, Don.
Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, you're hearing the use of the word, you're seeing it written, the word resiliency. I mean, it's in magazines, it's in newspapers, it's in books that I've been reading. Could you define to me and how you're using the term resiliency planning?
Yeah. So we've actually moved between resiliency and adaptation, and we haven't found that either of them really resonate with the community, either one. They're kind of big words that we don't use on a regular basis, so it's hard to go, oh, resiliency, I know what that is. So we've been using resiliency and adaptation kind of simultaneously, but the way we've been thinking about it is climate resiliency. So thinking about Aspen 50, 70, 100 years into the future, and saying how do we have a livable, vibrant, economically stable, environmentally stable town that we can still live in long into the future. So looking back, skiing started in Aspen in 1940, so we're, 50-some years down the road from that. What does Aspen look like in 50 years? What's our big industry? And making sure that we take steps now to adapt so that 50 years, 100 years from now, we're prepared. Because it's this really unique opportunity we have as humans to see what we need to adapt to and then make the changes now, as opposed to maybe in the past just adapting as we go, kind of on our feet. So that's
yeah, that kind of helps. It's just that it's just become the new buzzword, and I just wanted to know how that buzzword fits into this nook.
Yeah.
Because everybody's using it in different contexts and different, from fashion to sports to, and how are we using it in this case? So.
It's a word like sustainability that
Yeah, so it'll evolve through this discussion.
But
I will adapt to its use. I'll become resilient.
There you go.
But the government and the National Academy of Science, they have a definition which fits with what Ashley just said. And it, in a way, it comes out of natural hazards work where experts would assess risk based on, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, droughts. And in a broader context, you can think of, well, what are the system effects of natural hazards? And are we resilient to them as best we can be? And so that's kind of the broader, where you're assessing what the risk is, and then you're creating whatever you can do to make yourself more resilient, not just individuals, but communities.
So adaptable, conform, so you can go with the flow.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So to give you a little bit of background, the Canary Initiative was founded in 2005, and one of the first things that that the city did was actually create what you can see up there as the green report, and I have it here in paper copy as well, called Climate Change in Aspen. And this was the first report of its kind for a community of our size that really looked at how the changing climate was going to affect us here locally. So there's all these global climate models that come out every couple of years that look at how the global climate is changing. And then for this report, we were able to scale down those global climate models to our region so that we could say this is how the world is going to change, and then specifically this is how our valley, how the western slope, how Colorado is, the changes we're going to see. So that report was quite groundbreaking in 2006 when it came out, and got us all thinking about will there be an end to skiing, and what does that look like, and what can we do to prevent that? And the big thing that came out of that was, well, the big thing that's going to lead to an end to skiing in Aspen is going to be global climate emissions. So we should do our best as a community to reduce those. So they created in 2007 the Climate Action Plan, which laid out a plan to reduce Aspen and the Roaring Fork Valley's global climate emissions that we produce here. And then when I started working for Canary a couple years ago, we realized that Canary had two quests when they set out to create it. One was to mitigate and one was to adapt. And we hadn't really done much with that green report since it came out. We hadn't started an adaptation planning process. We knew what to prepare for, but as a community, we hadn't started preparing. So we said, okay, we should probably set out to write a resiliency plan and figure out what we can do today to become more resilient in the future. So we pulled out this green report and we realized 2006, that's probably way out of date. I called up John and he said, yeah, there's been a number of different climate models that have come out since then. It's probably time to redo that report and update it. So that's what we're presenting to you today, is the updated Climate Change in Aspen report. And I have a copy for everyone to take home as well. But this is really, really wonderful document, and we're so lucky to have it because lots of big cities in the U.S. and across the world have this, if you're talking to Washington or Portland or New York. But for a town of our size, a community our size, to have really great scientific data on the changes we can expect to see here in our community is phenomenal. And we've been encouraging other communities in our region to use it because it's a huge amount of work, as John can tell you, to create it, and we'd like to share it. So that's why it says Climate Change in Aspen, but it's relevant to, obviously, the county, and all of the towns in the Roaring Fork Valley, and even Vail and some of the other high mountain towns in Colorado. So we're doing our best to just share the report with everyone we can because we'd love for people to use it. So that's where we're at today. And then there's going to be 7 key points from the update, which John is going to share with you, and then we're going to talk about next steps and possibly how the city and the county can partner to move forward on this. So.
Okay. So I won't read these, but I think that most of this would be familiar to you, but we're going to report on some of the observations in the Aspen area since 1940, which maybe you haven't seen, and report a bit about people that we interviewed in different sectors and what they thought about climate change in relation to the building industry or energy codes or the skiing industry and their ability to adapt to climate change. And in all this talk about adaptation, the 7th point is a fundamental point that reducing greenhouse gases is a necessary part of ensuring resiliency. And in that, number 7 is not just solar and wind and hydro, but also innovative things that you can do with biomass, as well as the kinds of things that Emery Levins has been talking about for 30 plus years on efficiency and systems thinking. So we don't want to lose sight of the fact that we need to be a good community in terms of reducing our footprint, but because we're talking about gases emitted into the atmosphere by China, India, Germany, Japan, all the countries of the world, the climate of the future is dependent on the international progress on this number 7. So there's really been a massive amount of data collected. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, about every 5 years, produces a major report. The report is divided into 3 sections. The first section deals with the climate itself, physical climate change, and there's other reports on mitigation and adaptation and impacts. These international reports are the result of all the countries in the world getting together, science teams being selected and writing sections, and then summaries for policymakers that go into more of a political arena, in that the policymakers, like the State Departments of all these countries, have to kind of agree on the language in these reports. The reports below that are bringing it down more to the United States. The report on the left is the 3rd National Climate Assessment, and actually AGCI held the first meeting in 1997 of federal agencies that were designing the game plan for the National Climate Assessment, which came out in 2001. And there's been, the 3rd report just came out last year, and it's available online, and it's a great resource. And then at the state level, you know about the governor's requirement to do a water plan. Well, the state has also worked on producing climate change in Colorado, and there was a report produced in 2008, and then another one in 2014, looking at when you come down from the international to Colorado, what does climate change look like? So just looking at temperature, starting in 1900 and going through to 2012, this graph shows nothing about models. This is the global observed temperatures for 3 distinct areas. The gold color is the global temperature, which has gone up from 1900. And you can see during World War II, it kind of cooled off for a while, and then in the 70s, it started to warm up again. The US is the orange one, and the orange one is a little bit more varied year to year than the global temperature, and that's to be expected as you come down to smaller and smaller spatial scale. And then the red is even more varied year to year, but it follows the overall pattern, and the red is Colorado. And that line that goes through as being a 0 reference point is the global average temperature from 1971 to 2000. The simple message is the world has warmed up about 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's continuing to warm. The only way you can project what the climate of the future will be is to utilize climate models. And these models can be tested against the past climate, and they can be run into the future. But to run them into the future, you have to give these climate models a storyline of how much land use change there'll be, how many people on Earth, what kind of energy will these people be using, how many greenhouse gas emissions will occur. So this shows two possible futures. The red future is called RCP 8.5, which is just jargon that they use to describe a high emission scenario. And this is a world where there'll be 9 or 10 billion people and they're still using a lot of fossil fuels. The blue line is the low emission scenario where the climate stabilizes around 2.5 degrees, 3 degrees Fahrenheit, in that range. To get onto that path, the world would start to have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions consistently over the coming decades and relentlessly, so that by 2070, 2080, we'd actually be having negative emissions. And I can talk more about that later if you're interested, but I think it's fair to assume that the world is on the red path, we want to be on the blue path, and we're likely to be in between, which means that the temperature of the Earth will be more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit and hopefully less than 8 or 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a world that is very different than the world that we grew up in, the 20th century world. So looking locally, we can look at our own temperature records, and we can think about, our own memories of climate going back into the 50s or 60s or 70s. Whenever you thought about it, you have your own life experiences. But the temperature record that's been maintained by the Aspen Weather Station is collecting snow and temperature and rainfall, and has been doing so really since the 1890s, but in a more erratic sense until about 1940, when it got more regular. So here we're looking at these blue bars, which are decades. So the first bar is the 1940s, and the line graph above the bar is the year-to-year numbers. And you can see that from 1940 to 1970s, there was a slight increase, and just doing the math on those numbers, you get a 1 degree increase in that period. And then the weather station moved up to the new water plant up behind the hospital. And at the new location, which is about 200 feet higher in elevation, it's enough of a difference that we consider it a new station. And so we ran those numbers and put the averages into the darker blue decadal numbers. And there you see that there's been about a 1.4 degree increase. But you can also see that year to year there's incredible variability. And just going from 1980 to 2012, in a human lifetime is a good chunk of time. But from a climate record standpoint, it's still a fairly short period of time. But there is an upward trend in those years. And one of the things that, when you think about agriculture or making snow in the fall, the ecosystems that we have, even things like whether we need air conditioning or not, the average minimum temperature is a measure that you can make that gives you additional information. So here what you're seeing in the upper left is December, January, and February, and you can see over the decades from the 40s to the present, the average minimum temperature in the winter has gone up a fair amount. It's gone up in the spring. Every season it's gone up. The summer and fall are almost identical in terms of their pattern. But the message is that this changes our ecosystems, our species, our snow, our agriculture, our water availability. Minimum temperatures are very important. And another way to think about minimum temperatures is between 33 and 32 degrees. When you get to freezing, then many things change. And this is a record of frost-free days. And so you can see that there's been a significant increase in frost-free days. Lee Casson with the Environmental Department years ago started putting out graphs about the increase in frost-free days, and this is really just an extension of what she was doing. But it's another indicator that's really important. Think if you're a snow mountain manager and you want to make snow in November and you want the temperatures to be cold enough to do that.
That, to me, that one graph, if anyone ever asks, has climate change already affected Aspen? That graph tells that entire story. We're so familiar with how days when it freezes are so important to us for making snow early in the season and keeping snow late into the season. Even things like beetle kill, we need those freezing days to have a strong forest. And so if anybody ever asks that, that's the one graph I always point to, that 23 days since 1980 when it's not freezing is a huge, huge change that we are seeing right now on the ground. It's measurable. So I think that's a really key point to remember if you're ever engaging in a conversation with somebody about how we're seeing changes here on the ground.
Now this graph is from that National Climate Report in 2014. And it shows on the left, the United States, the plant hardiness zones in the past 10 years. And you can see that there's been some expansion of the zones, but not a lot. But if you look at the projections for the next 30 years, as we move into warmer climate, the hardiness zones are going to change. And zone 10, which barely showed up, is going to become more and more significant. Zone 9 has a swath across the southeast. And so you can see the state of Colorado is going to experience zone change. So if you're irrigating pasture, you know, this kind of information is fundamental to the timing of what you're doing and what the prospects are if there's not a good summer monsoon for soil drying out, etc.
Well, it comes down to even landscaping your own front yard.
Yes.
And that, because I know when I worked at Planet Earth, we were always having to change what plants we were ordering based on the change in zones for our elevations and our valley.
Yes.
So it hits you right at home, too.
Yes. Now, precipitation is a much more difficult pattern for climate models to represent. This is observations from the weather station. And you can see, again, year to year, it's very variable. Between the 40s and 70s, not really any significant trend. There was a western drought in the 1950s, which is reflected in the decade there. And then when you look at the dark blue bars and you're in the new weather station up at the water plant, you know, you can see how just a couple of years that go way up make a huge difference. And if anything, there's maybe a slight downward trend since 1980, but really I look at that as no significant change.
Steve? Can I ask the
Yeah,
question?
Rachel.
Thank you, John. Back to that, the precipitation. So this is annual precipitation. It's not just snowfall.
Right.
Okay. Because the one thing it would be interesting to add in here, and it may be on your next slide, I may be jumping the gun, but the cloud seeding efforts. I mean, there have been cloud seeding to make more snow in Colorado, to try to fill up the Colorado River for California states. The lower basin states are the ones who pay for it. But it'd be interesting to see, you know, I have a feeling the previous years were unmanipulated, whereas now it has been, to the extent possible, manipulated to try to increase our precipitation.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I don't have a slide about cloud seeding, but the literature is very mixed about the benefits of cloud seeding.
Yeah.
And most scientists don't think it really works.
Yeah.
And there are companies that think it works, and they convince people from time to time to do it. And if you have a lot of extra interest in trying to get a little bit more rain, and you have the money, you're going to hedge your bets maybe and buy one of these services. But I think the research is very mixed, and most scientists don't think it's a reliable way. It might occasionally work, but it's very difficult to sort out whether that situation would have rained anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm just saying that it's not as if there's all these numbers that aren't somewhere manipulated by
Right,
someone
okay.
in the background, and they've been trying to make more. So, you know,
Right.
and they fund that pretty vigorously, and there's been a lot of arguments, is it stealing the front range moisture if we take it in the mountains, and they've kind of shown, no, it doesn't work that way, but California and those other states are paying pretty heavily to cloud seed Colorado.
Yeah, what I've read is that if you have a condition where the potential is there, there's precipitable cloud formation, seeding might help.
Right.
But if there isn't, it won't help. And so when you have the long stretches like we do before the monsoon pattern, you can't do anything with seeding. And even if you did, it's very hard to tell whether it really benefited your county or your watershed.
Agreed.
So snowfall also highly variable, and I circled in red there the 1976 when we went into the 76 winter. It was, if you were here then, it was a remarkably different year in terms of snowfall. And after that year, anecdotally, I've heard that the SCICO invested with a Canadian company in installing snowmaking equipment and trying to, in a sense, adapt, build resiliency so that you could open on Thanksgiving or thereabouts. And again, look at the natural variability. It's a lot in precipitation. Just to give an example of how these climatic changes can affect things that we have come to know as our valley, aspen trees being a signature tree in the Roaring Fork Valley. There are research papers, this one is just a couple weeks old, on trying to figure out the mortality that is seen in aspen stands in the state of Colorado. And one of the thoughts is that the 2000 to 2003 period of pretty heavy drought was damaging to a lot of aspens, where they just weren't getting enough water up through their root system, and then they got weak and susceptible to disease. So this area of research, sudden aspen decline, is ongoing, but this paper is an example where we know physically that when you have higher temperatures for a given soil moisture, you're going to dry the soil out. If you've got plants in that soil, it's going to drive faster evapotranspiration. So this is something to keep an eye on in terms of, if we stay on the high path, this figure here, the high emission path, would be represented by these graphs. This is looking at climate, water driven by climate change and water availability. And you can see between 5,000 and 6,000 millimeters, there's a hash line. That's what they consider, the tree biologists consider, kind of a mortality line. If you go above that line, the risk of aspens dying goes up. And so at the bottom, you're seeing the future, 2020 to 2080. So this is a model projection based on the high emission scenario, that red scenario, of what could happen to aspens based on 87 stands in Colorado. The study was primarily on southwestern Colorado, but the message is similar for us. So in trying to take these global climate models and get some regional information, that's the next part of the story. We engaged the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder and others to help us in taking the global climate information and giving us a sense, not of aspen in particular, but the region that aspen is a part of, the context for the Western Slope region, kind of the Colorado Plateau and the western side of the Continental Divide. Now this graph is from the 2014 Colorado study that had no direct relationship to our modeling effort that we did with NCAR, but the results are very similar. They're showing, the state of Colorado, they're showing 1900 to 2012. The blue and the red are observations year to year. And then the yellow, which is kind of a very noisy up and down graph, is running the model and running it into the future. So they're showing you how the model captures the natural variability in temperature in terms of how much it goes up and down each year. It's not going to capture any particular year correctly. But what you look at it for is what kind of trend is it showing you? So if you go out to 2050, where that black dot is, and then the error bar, error bars on the black dot, you're seeing the likely increase in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit by 2050 for the state of Colorado, and it's close to 4 degrees. If you go out further, you know, the trend just keeps going up. So this is startling. This is as I said at the beginning, it's a different Colorado than the one we knew in the 20th century. Now, switching now to the work that was done for the city of Aspen by us. On the left there is a map with 4 yellow boxes. It's hard to see, but it's basically what I described. Kind of west of the Continental Divide, out over the Colorado Plateau. So that was our study area, and the red dot is Aspen.
And that's why, although the report is called Climate Change in Aspen, we want to share this report with not just the county, but with the whole region, because it's relevant. That's the entire study area that this report that's in front of you relates to. So if you have friends or you know of towns in that study area, this report is probably relevant to them. So although it's specifically for Aspen in our Pickens County area, really sharing it with anyone in this study group, it's going to be relevant, and we're going to help others to start to anticipate changes that they'll see there. So keep that study area in mind.
So going back to that first temperature projection I gave you, where there was the red one and the blue one, the high one is the one that's in the circle here. Using that global climate model, set of models actually, it's 35 models approximately that are averaged together to give these numbers. You can see that we would have, going into the future, by 2090, almost a 10-degree change. So that's really radical. The yellow at the top there is middle emissions. So this isn't as low as the blue one I showed you at the beginning. And the yellow is a medium scenario. It's like one of those future storylines for the world that is more likely than the very lowest or the very highest. Oh, we think it's more likely. We hope it's more likely. And there you can see that the temperature increase would be roughly almost half, well, a little bit more than half of what it is in the high emission scenario. So there's so much motivation for the world to reduce emissions and avoid damages, which will cost more than investing those dollars today in fixing the problem. So that's a message and it's a conversation that's happening in, towns, counties, states, nation states. But it's really a conversation that has to accelerate if we're going to avoid this red circle here. Precipitation for Colorado and for our study area is much more difficult to project. The climate models don't capture precipitation as well. They don't do a good job with the mountain range and how it affects precipitation. So you really have to take precipitation projections with a grain of salt. But they don't show much change. Whether you're the medium emission or the high emission, there's really not that much change. These are given as a percentage compared to a normal period, 1980 to 1999. And here's another graph from the State of Colorado report that just came out. And you can see when they run the model against the baseline, you have a lot of noise in the light blue lines. And you have the 2050 projection, which is just slightly wetter than the historical observations that go back to 1900. So given the error in the precipitation modeling ability, you really can't see much of a signal in the modeled precipitation of the future. But there's a lot of agreement in the science community that Colorado will get hotter. And because it'll be hotter, if precipitation is a little bit less or a little bit more or stays the same, those higher temperatures are going to drive more evaporation. And that'll affect ecosystems, water availability, all the things that go with water. So this last point here, evaporation, evapotranspiration, and precipitation are going to be altered by temperature change. The timing of runoff will be affected as well. And, the Colorado Water Plan, has some acknowledgement of climate change, but some people feel that it's inadequate in terms of really thinking through the possibility of what the water shortfall might be in the coming decades. So what we were trying to do is characterize the sectors of our community. And this goes for Aspen, Pickens County, any of the counties in the valley, any of the towns in the valley. We're all connected in terms of jobs, public health and safety, energy, water, the built environment, tourism. We all share these in the valley. And it's kind of one of the key things that we're trying to do is, it's not an Aspen report. The report itself isn't that important. What's important is maybe to think of ways for the jurisdictions within the Roaring Fork Valley to think about these sectors and how climate change will affect them and how we can work together to be better prepared. So I'll turn it back over to Alice. Ashley, I'm sorry.
So in the report in front of you, there's page 51 has a graph that has this image on the left-hand side. And to me, this is the real meat of the report from a city or county planning perspective. So the big takeaway from what John just said is Aspen's going to get warmer, and we're going to have about the same amount of precipitation, but that means if it's warmer, we'll have more rain, less snow. So what does more rain, less snow, warmer temperatures look like for us? Well, the only way that we were able to put it into our lens for looking at it from the city was to look at these 6 different sectors that we feel are vital to life here. So that's the ecology, water, rec and tourism, health and safety, energy, and the built environment. So we asked John and his team at AGCI to take this warmer future with more rain, less snow, and tell us what it looks like for all these different sectors. And they came back to us and they said, well, we can't do that. We're scientists. We can't tell you exactly what it looks like for rec and tourism with a warmer temperature. But they said we can give you a gauge of change from incremental to transformative. So that's what this chart shows us. It shows us that if we're staying at some of those lower emission scenarios where there's less population using less energy, then maybe we can see some of these incremental changes. Things like changes in average temperatures, an increase in frost-free days, maybe a change to the local hydrology. But if we're signing up for this 8 or 9 degree change, these big red scenarios that John gave us, we're looking at transformative change. And that's severe fire, extreme precipitation, and drought. So there is a moving target here, but it's good to figure out what we as a community want to plan for. Is it the incremental, is it transformative, or is it somewhere in between? And you can see that this chart across the top is those 6 key sectors. So you can say, okay, I want to plan for somewhere in between incremental and transformative. So let's call it changes in extreme temperatures. And then you can look across the graph and say, how is that going to affect water? And you can think through what that might look like for water or rec and tourism. And so this is a really useful kind of exercise for us to do here as the city and county together to say, if changes in average annual temperature, how does that affect the recreation sector? How does it affect the built environment? Are we going to need more air conditioning and less heat? And therefore we're going to see more electricity load and less natural gas load. This becomes very real. You know, it's fun to think about the big global climate models, but this has really real implications that we can start to talk about today, kind of using this, this chart as a guide for us to think through. How does this affect, Patty, your life day to day, what plants we plant in our own yard versus as city and county entities, how do we plan for the future and make sure that we have enough water and energy as our population increases and as our climate changes. So I use this chart a lot to talk about the value of the report and things that we should start to consider in our planning. So I encourage you to look at it as well. And I think that that's probably where the basis of our conversations will go from here. One of the other things that we did, that John and his team did for the interviews, was sat down with a number of key stakeholders in the community and asked them what they're concerned about and what they've already done to start planning. And it was really interesting to hear from leaders in the community, raft guides, fishing guides, a lot of folks from the ski company, to hear about the ways that they are already adapting and the changes that they've seen already happening. So that's included in the report as well, which I think adds a human element to the report, because a lot of it is known changes and perceived changes, and then there's all the things that we know living in this community that we've seen and that we're anticipating. So I think the report's really valuable in that it includes those aspects of it.
Just a clarification on your top bullet point, is that global population growth, Colorado population growth, Roaring Fork Valley population growth?
It was Colorado and Roaring Fork Valley primarily.
Okay.
I think there was one person who mentioned global as well, but most of them were discussing Colorado and Roaring Fork Valley growth.
Thank you.
And one of the things that came up with in relation to population growth is not the traditional population growth that we see where people move here and build houses, because we know that that's not as feasible here. But one of the things that we've been talking about the city is there's a lot of homes right now that can house a lot more people than are in them for a lot more periods of the year than are there. And so what does that kind of population growth look like when maybe some of the larger homes in Aspen that are currently only occupied a couple weeks out of the year or a month out of the year actually become occupied by more people for more months out of the year? How does that increase the load on our energy and water and our infrastructure, even our public health systems, and how do we prepare for that? So one of the other great findings of the report was that, yes, we need to plan for the future, but at the same time, significant reductions in greenhouse gases are really, really key to this. So our climate here in Aspen is determined by the greenhouse gas emissions globally. So that's why Canary and a lot of the time that we spend is actually spent at the federal level. And you'll actually hear for some great stuff later in your agenda today about the Citizens Climate Lobby and the work that we can do as a community using our name at the federal level to get greenhouse gas emissions. Because what we do here is great, and reducing Aspen and Pickens County's footprint is really key, but we also need to use that as a model for what's happening across the globe. Because if we don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally, we're not going to see a change here. And then the last finding that we found was that resiliency planning, however you want to describe that term, can help us reduce those vulnerabilities that we're seeing and anticipate the impacts so that it's not all doom and gloom. So that maybe if we can see the changes that are coming, we can actually use them as beneficial opportunities. So here's a great exact definition of resiliency if we want to get descriptive. But the ability of a system and its components and parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event or gradual systemic change. So that gets me thinking, I don't know, Patty, if that works for you.
That's very helpful, actually, yeah.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do here with this report and then moving ahead is to reduce our vulnerabilities as a community so that we know what's coming. And what you see a lot in other cities is if we had an ocean and we were a coastal city, we would have started this conversation quite a while ago, because we would have been able to point to the ocean and say, that looks like it's coming up and it's coming into our town. What do we want to do about it? As a Western city, we have a harder case to make to the community to say that we have a problem and that we need to plan for it, because it's not as easy to point to the changes that we're seeing. We've been very lucky here that we haven't seen some of the extreme fires or extreme floods that our other Colorado towns have seen, but those are the sort of changes we're talking about. So while I want to keep us safe and we don't want to see those extreme events, we want to let people know that that's what we're talking about. If it's a coastal city, it's sea level rise. If it's a western city like Aspen, we're talking about some of these more extreme events being our big vulnerabilities. So what does this resiliency planning thing look like? What are we even talking about? So there's this category of options and what these options can actually mean when we engage in them. So some of the easier things to do where we've started is to assess the risks and learn. So that's what we've done here. We've created a study that tells us what our risks are, and we've started to learn. And we've had, this report is available on the website ourfutureaspen.com, and we've been encouraging everyone to go there and give us their feedback and read through the report. You can watch little videos of the canary talking about the report. We've tried to make it as accessible as possible. Another category as we move down the resiliency planning category would be to actually reduce that exposure. So that would be identifying some assets that might be in harm's way and actually moving those out of harm's way. So is it that as we see changes, we might expect to see more mudslides and some of our infrastructure is in the way of mudslides? I don't know, but that's a great conversation to have. And then if so, let's talk about keeping our assets out of harm's way. As you continue kind of down that list, you can talk about enhancing preparedness by looking at emergency response. So that's something as basic as talking to our community about basic emergency response. As we see more extreme weather events, does everyone in town have a flashlight and water and some food if the power were to go out? Does everyone have a neighbor that they can go to? Or a neighbor that's going to check on them? Really, really basic community preparedness is something that we can engage in. Also, we want to increase resilience. So we want to think about how we ensure the continuity of services and speed up our rebound time post events. So if we were to have the power go out or have our water supply compromised or anything like that, how do we ensure that we get that back to the people as soon as we can? So these are just some of the conversations that we kind of hope to have over the next few years about how we as a community can increase our preparedness, decrease our vulnerabilities. Just making sense a little bit, putting this on the ground for you? Great. So these are the recommendations that AGCI and John's team have given to us for how we move forward with resiliency planning. He tells us to embrace uncertainty, which I think is, this report is great and it puts the impacts really in writing for us. But obviously we don't have a crystal ball. So we have to take the models that we have and trust them, but also know that a lot of it is not, we can't guarantee anything. He tells us that we should act collaboratively with stakeholders, which is why I'm here today and why John and I are sharing this report with Town of Snowmass Village, Town of Carbondale, the Future Forest Roundtable, the Roaring Fork Watershed Collaborative. We just want to let everyone in the Valley know that this report is there and see what you're interested in collaborating on. And then we want to move to a place where we're actually clearly defining actions, responsibilities, and resources. And so that's going to be our next plan. Our next step here is to actually create a plan that identifies our vulnerabilities and then talks about what the city and county and other entities might want to do to reduce those. And this is just an example of some other towns that have done this. So Boulder had a resiliency plan in place and had done a lot of work before their big flood. Although that was extremely damaging, they said it could have been far worse had they not planned for a big flood of that size. Keene, New Hampshire, they had a big flood as well, I believe, that they prepared for. Moab is preparing for water shortages, not surprising. So there's other entities out here, a ton of cities and towns across the US and internationally who have started this work, who we're learning from. So I encourage you to check out the report, which is in front of you, but let others know that the report is available. ourfutureaspen.com is where we put it. And we're just trying to make it really accessible. And then really the next steps is that I'm hoping that the county would be interested in kind of partnering as we move ahead with making this plan and assessing as a whole community what our vulnerabilities are and where there are partnership opportunities that maybe we can act now on some things, or maybe we can develop some monitoring programs to figure out how some of this is affecting our vulnerabilities, and then reaching out to others to get the key people involved. Because really the goal here is we want to begin to incorporate climate impacts into existing planning efforts. So when I talk to the public about this, I say, when you're planning for the future, what do you plan for? You plan for retirement, plan for population growth, if your knees are going to work, all these sorts of things, right? So as the city and county, what I'm suggesting and what Canary is suggesting is that we start to incorporate climate impacts as one of the things that we think about when we plan for the future. So that, you know, along with the economy and all sorts of other things. And this report is a great thing to say, you know, when you get your economic projections, how are we planning for next year's budget? The report is a great way to say, how are we planning for the next 10 years? Let's figure out what the climate's going to look like and include those as one of our factors that we plan for. So that is what we're hoping to do.
Is that the Highlands closing day party?
Yes.
That's from yesterday.
It's a little Canary photo shoot that we did. So really, we just wanted to present the report to you and see what's of most interest and what questions you might have and what steps you might want to take going forward.
I have a question, and I should know the answer to this, and I apologize for not knowing. Who is the city's dedicated emergency management person? Does the city have one?
I'd imagine they do, but probably with the police department.
We coordinate with the city through our emergency management department. We've created emergency support function leads throughout the community. They're not all county staff. We have city staff in those roles as well as county staff. And then each of those emergency support function leads has a team backing them up that's made up of community members. So the not just the city of Aspen, but Snowmass Village, Basalt, the county.
So it's like an overall ICS.
Yeah, so we've got that structure that we're working on together.
But the city does not have a specified, like we have, Valerie is our, you know, emergency management.
No, but they do have folks designated within those emergency support functions if we have an event.
Okay.
Yeah.
George? Actually, when you're talking about when you had your area that you were using as a study area, which is greater than the Aspen area, and you want to reach out to other communities within that area. So if you look at the idea, the concept of regionalism, in terms of trying to address getting prepared for climate change, how would you envision that on a regional effort, even if you go just to the Roaring Fork Valley or out through the western slope?
Yeah, I think it would, there's some vulnerabilities that are going to be really unique to Aspen, but I think there's a number of vulnerabilities that are spread across the Roaring Fork Valley. One of them being that we all rely on Holy Cross Energy, or most of us do, for a lot of our energy. So maybe there's some regional component there where we work with Holy Cross to understand a little bit more about the vulnerabilities to the infrastructure and what happens in an outage and if there's a role that we can play there. Or I think the biggest one is really water. In our region and the next valley, you know, as we've seen with the water conservation plans and the state plan, we're in this together, and the stronger our voice can be together, I think that the more we can kind of protect our own interests here as a valley. And so knowing how climate is going to affect our water and then putting that into the comments that it sounds like you might give by May 1st to the state, I think is really powerful to know that Aspen and Pickens County and others are all in it together because we see that we're all vulnerable in the same way there.
Yeah, I think that also, George, the mountain resort communities along the backbone of the Rockies would be a natural, but we're going to, I think our goal initially is the Roaring Fork watershed because we're so connected and so related in so many ways. And there's also existing systems that bridge all those jurisdictions like RAFTA, fire districts cooperating, school districts. I mean, there are examples of people from different sectors in different jurisdictions in the valley already working together. So this is just adding something for them to consider, and whether we do some kind of umbrella about it all, you know, we have to hear what they think before we really know. And you know, on that last point, what you all think as county commissioners is really, I think, important in terms of how we can think about this.
Well, thank you for the city for your work, and John naturally as well. I would just comment that, you know, averages never tell a true story, and that there can be highs much more than the 8 degrees or given days, and heat waves, and, you know, unusually warm Marches and things like that. So once you get down to an average, you can go, oh, it's only 4 degrees. But, you know, when you look at the different applications of that, it can be much higher, much more significant. And certainly the global averages or the national averages, again, seem, you know, relatively small, but then they're melting at a much higher rate in the Arctic and in different areas. So that to me would be a point I would try to make if there's a modification, because again, I know that when I go from 98.8 to 102, I'm really sick. But it's easy enough for people to say, 3 degrees, we can live with that. And they just don't realize the high points and the extremes that happen there. I know Cindy and others in the city participated with the Climate Resiliency Project that the Rocky Mountain Climate Change Institute participated in with Colorado Municipal League. And their results have not yet been released as a final report. They're actually meeting with some of the governor's staff tomorrow to kind of go over some of the findings and things like that. But you know, it all depends on how far you want to take the concern at a short time. I have no doubt that many of these issues will come to pass, but it's always the timing. But issues were raised like climate refugees, and you know, whose coastal areas are flooded or who are now non-productive, and where do they go? Where there's a good economy, where there's work. You know, we saw that even with the recession, where people said, well, I lost my job, so I might as well be broke in Colorado than broke in Iowa, you know, and things like that. But where people move to cooler places, people move to places that, you know, still offer some of the previous things. Larger food systems, you know, we are very dependent on imported food stuff in this community, and we're trying to bump up the local food delivery system. So, you know, that could be a response to climate change that we could embrace more fully and pump up within our valley. So I really am concerned for the future generations of what we're going to be facing. And I think this is very good work, and I'd like to see what we can do within our means and our abilities to kind of further this work.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that, you know, you talked about, and we'll hear shortly about what the Citizens Climate Lobby is doing, but we want to use Aspen as a model because of the name recognition that we have, and because of the people that come in here as well, and their influence as they go back into their spheres of influence where they live. This is not an immediate solution, but as we're just starting to go through the development of ideas from our community for our airport, you know, as a gateway to our community where we've got thousands of visitors from across the world that come here, there's an opportunity in that future planning perhaps to include a model information on climate change, certainly using the Discovery Center, Discovery as part of that story. You know, last time I was in Chicago, they had a great exhibit by James Baylock, who's been here before, in terms of his photos of the work he's done up in Greenland. And while you're hanging out waiting for your flight, it was so informative. And I think we have an opportunity in this community to get our word out beyond this table by using some of our infrastructure, such as the airport.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
John. Well, and I think also following up on our retreat discussion, you know, one of the things that the board had stated there was to lay out a goal for us to play more of a role convening regional discussions around sustainability, and I'm hearing an invitation to participate in that. And so I think at the staff level it'd be good for us to talk a little bit more about, you know, the discussion that the board had at the retreat and how you talked about those, to see how we can integrate our discussions. And one of the big differences between the city and the county is just simply geography, right? We operate on a more regional basis, and so perhaps we can play part in convening some of these discussions and utilizing the expertise that the city spent some time developing. So, you know, the boards can say, I think it'd be good for staffs to get together and maybe come back and talk more about what a partnership might look like going forward.
You know, and I see it as an opportunity from an emergency management, because I have background in that, is that, you know, people aren't prepared for emergencies in our valley because we don't have tornadoes and hurricanes, and they see that as an issue that's going to happen somewhere else. And I think they need to realize that flooding, fire, especially fire issues, people need to be prepared. Power outages, simple things that we haven't really had big power outages because we've been putting everything underground. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So it's an opportunity, I think, to gear people back up again to having those emergency kits in their homes for a variety of reasons, and I think it's perfect.
Yeah. I was just going to say that fits with what Rachel was saying about extreme events, that they're infrequent, but when they happen, they can be devastating. And the story is not in the averages, it's in those kind of impactful events. Right. And one of the things that maybe we've become a little complacent about is the potential for harder rains, that even though our annual amount might not be any different, but really harder rains in a short period of time can trigger landslide, for instance.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, every sector could look at what their vulnerability is. It's not like the report isn't a roadmap for what to do, it's a roadmap for what to think about, and what additional kind of putting our heads together, rolling up our sleeves and thinking how to build resiliency. What does it look like?
Yeah, exactly.
I have a couple of observations, and thanks for bringing up the food issue, because that was one thing I was going to point out, where California produces 80% of the food in the United States, and maybe I don't know what percentage, but certainly a big percentage for here. And they only have 5% of their water available this summer, so you don't have food on your chart, but it could hit us later this summer like a sledgehammer. I was at a National Farmers Union convention a few weeks ago, and at that convention there was a former brigadier general who studies resiliency for national security issues in relation to climate change. And he stated that the number 2 cause of greenhouse gas emissions is land use practices across the whole world. So things like deforestation and farming practices are a huge contributor to climate change, and therefore they would also could be a huge part of the solution. And so that, you know, we always talk about, I mean, we know we have to reduce the burning of fossil fuels, but there's other ways to attack it, and that should be addressed too. And also in relation to the collaboration, some of us in the room went to the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Roundtable meeting in Glenwood Springs just about last week, I think it was. And there's supposed to be a follow-up meeting of that tentatively planned for June 12th. And that's just, to me, the beginning of the collaboration that we all need to be getting together as counties and towns and putting all of our heads and energy together and really working on this problem together, because it's going to take everybody's effort to really gain some headway.
Yeah.
So, any more comments from commissioners?
It was very interesting, thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. And also, I might point out, Ashley did a presentation for Club 20, a very good PowerPoint presentation that I think was received very well by the Club 20 members. And you did an awesome job, Ashley, at that.
Brave soul.
Rachel sent
So.
The lion's dead. I told you what to watch for. Thank you so much for your time.
You survived, thank you.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break right now, and then we'll come back at 3:15 and be on time for the presentation on the
Brown. I'm
Okay.
here with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a local organization that just got started in last October. So we're a small new citizen organized group. And I'm the co-leader with Mona Newton. And because we don't have enough batteries. When you're driving? Great. So Citizen Climate Lobby is essentially our purpose is to create the political will for a stable climate. Well, what does that mean? That means that we as citizens are a group that works with our policymakers. And we are a group of action and a group of, rather than attending more meetings and doing more talking, we are totally action oriented. We're a 501c3. We are, there are 200 chapters throughout the whole United States, and then another 50 that are international. So we're growing exponentially very quickly, because it just started a few years ago. And in the Roaring Fork Valley here, we have 2 chapters. We have a chapter that used to be run by David Reed, who you all know from Wilderness Workshop, and then our local chapter, which has just started. So essentially, we get groups of volunteers, which many are in our audience. Thank you very much. And we train them. We train them to work across party lines, to work across the aisle as a nonpartisan group that works towards solutions. And we do that by the advocating for a policy of carbon fee and dividend. So the basic overview, a carbon fee and dividend is a policy proposal created by Citizen Climate Lobby to internalize the costs of burning carbon-based fuels. That essentially means that when the carbon comes out of the ground, it gets taxed. And that is only a tax on the actual companies that are producing they're profiting from our general resources, our natural resources. And that tax is turned into a fee. And that fee is given across every household in the United States. And that's the beauty of it. It's very simple. This policy that is written, that's presently, we have the legislation written. It's 60 pages long. Most legislation is 2,000 pages long. And in its beauty and its simplicity is that they can't, no side, the Democrats or the Republicans, can water it down. It is what it is. It's simply a fee that will be across the board and create a level playing field, basically, for. The fee starts at a simple, 15 per ton, and then exponentially over the years raises slowly. It's all returned to all households, and the really interesting part about it that I find is it predictably increases carbon price, which will send a clear market signal, which will unleash entrepreneurs and investors in the clean energy economy. So essentially what this does is it brings everybody down to a level playing field. And as the owner and operator of the world's largest single-phase hydroelectric facility, I am able to compete with the coal industry because I can sell through a power purchase agreement to our utility company at the exact same price that the coal company does at Four Corners. So and the reason that I'm able to sell at that same price, which happens to be 8 cents, so I sell for 8 cents and Four Corners sells for 8 cents. My utility company, the San Luis Valley, they want that price because they are mandated, obviously, as you all know, to buy a certain percentage of renewables. So I have, because of the Renewable Energy Act that was passed, renewables got incentivized, and now we can be competitive with the fossil fuel industry. So all it takes is something like this to bring it down to a level playing field where renewables can compete with fossil fuels. So let's see. This is really a key element of carbon fee and dividend, is that
yes, we have this great idea, and we are all looking for solutions on climate change. So the Regional Economic Modeling Inc., REMI, they did a study, and they are very well known, they're very well respected. And their study concluded that it was essentially stimulated the economy, created jobs, had a huge benefits for our health, for our overall health. And one thing that isn't on here is that it also addresses our national security. It definitely, the areas that have been identified as areas that are most affected by climate change are very unstable areas. In that, you will create, just as Steve was saying before, you create a lot of instability in that. So the carbon fee and dividend addresses that because it brings everything into that level. And I think what the, just the REMI report gave us real ability to be legitimately, we can walk into a Republican congressional office and say, here are the numbers, here's how this works, here's why this is a good idea for all of your constituents. And what it did for us was it really took it took climate change out of the ability, or the confines of it being a issue that is strictly an environmental issue. It's not. Climate change is a social economic issue. And you can cross party lines when you are no longer having discussion and squabbling over whether climate change is real or not. You can talk actual numbers of here's what this means to this region, here's what this means to Colorado, here's what this means to the nation, here's what this means to the world. So it really gave us the ability to be able to be nonpartisan and present a solution that everybody has to agree with. I mean, it's really quite not only common sense, but it is economic sense. So, 20 years CO2. So this, in its creating of millions of jobs, and also being able to improve our air quality, you have huge health benefits. And as we all know, that is right now one of Obama's, because of what's happening with EPA, this addresses so many of those issues. So it comes at the problem. It comes at the problem of climate change from so many different avenues, and it finds a solution to all of those problems that cross all party lines, basically. Okay, so locally, what are we doing? Monthly meetings. We have a monthly meeting, and in that monthly meeting, we have an international call. So we have experts from all across the world, and they're experts in everything from a field of admiral, a rear admiral of the Navy. The Navy is our 5th highest CO2 producer in the world. You have U.S., China, the European contingency, India, and then the U.S. Navy. So the Navy, it's one of the Navy's highest priorities because of the instabilities that are being caused by climate change. So we were able to sit here right in Aspen, and we were able to have this conversation with these incredible experts. We've also had experts from the religious faith groups who are also very concerned about this, Catholic priests. We've had experts from the solar industry. We've had experts from engineers from shale oil, who they're also very concerned about it. They're, this is a problem for all of us, not just the people who are concerned about it. What we do in our meetings is we listen to our regional call. We brainstorm on ideas of what we can do locally that will have an impact nationally as well as locally. One of those that very hands-on action items are writing letters. I don't know if you saw this week, we had a letter to both Tipton and Gardner, and also to Bennett from Christy Mahone, who I'm sure you all know Christy Mahone. She's skied every 13,000 foot peak here, and she works at ACES. She's a great community member. And she really was able to tell her story of how climate change is impacting her, who she is as a person, not to mention this whole community. And it personalizes it because it's a handwritten letter, and it's written to each congressman or woman and senators, and it is, then we have an envoy in Washington, D.C., and that envoy actually takes these hard-copied letters and delivers them to the office of them. So it's very effective, and they actually are really getting the message that carbon fee and dividend is a solution that crosses party lines. And we also train our members to be, the members here that are, we train our members to work across party lines, to work as a team. We go into an office and we meet with our members of Congress. And in that, each one has a role as citizens of the United States, of the community. We each go in, we each have a role, and we find common ground. That's our number one priority, is to find common ground with whoever we are meeting with. And from that common ground, then we establish a relationship, and from that relationships, then we have the ability to work with them on carrying forth this policy, this legislation. Our next meeting will be in Grand Junction. We're taking 4 of us, several of them, and we will be going over to meet with both Gardner and Tipton's staff on April the 20th. We also have Chris Lane from ACES, who will take the day off from work. He'll put on his hat, his dad hat, and he'll take the day off from ACES, and he'll come with us. We also have Rebecca Weiss, who is, a naturalist. You all know Rebecca Weiss. She will come with us. And so as this team, we will come forward and we will meet with these staff members and start developing a relationship with them. And from there, we will be attending the international conference in Washington, D.C. in this June, which is essentially a chance to go to Washington, and we have arranged meetings with all of our members of Congress. We'll be able to take this team in, and we will meet with them and be able to have an honest, straightforward conversation about a carbon fee and dividend and how this is a potential solution for addressing climate change. And so, what the things that we have been able to accomplish in our short stint here since October is Steve Childs, thank you very much, did an excellent presentation at the Farmers Union Conference. This is a unique, as Steve mentioned, our whole agriculture industry is a huge piece of climate change, and it's an area, not only is it fossil fuels, but it's also how we're in food production and how that plays a role in that. So Steve was able to address that, so we thanked him profusely for doing that and to do that. We've had several tabling events where we have reached out to the community members just to try and spread our message and then to encourage them to take action, because we are a group of action. To encourage them to take action by writing postcards. We have printed postcards. Missy Pruden did a wonderful local scene that she watercolored, and we took those, we printed those, and then we had the actual addresses of the members of Congress, and then we have just some basic points of what it is, what carbon fee and dividend means. So the writer simply writes that, signs their names, put their addresses on it, and we've sent almost 400 postcards in the last few weeks. So they're getting the message. These members of Congress are getting the message. It's a very hands-on way to get the message across to them. And then... You might want to mention that Autumn Schindler was told by this particular front. So this is what spurred this on. So Auden Schindler is one of our members of CCL, and so he does meet periodically with our members of Congress. And here we had been giving them tons of different forms of letters, in postcards and actual letters and op-eds and lots of different things that were addressed to them as well as put into papers. And when Auden met with them, he said, no, this is Tipton's office. He said, no, we haven't received anything. And so I compiled a huge pile of everything that had been sent to his office, and I resent it to his office. And he had to write me a letter of apology and say, oh yes, I'm sorry, yes, we have been receiving these.
Funny how they just
Just
appear.
filing them in the circular file.
So we have been working with the Caring Initiative. Ashley's been terrific. We have Chris here, who he is our, he keeps us alert and up to date and informed with all the latest facts and figures and what's happening, because that's what he is best at. And so he comes to our meetings, and he will also be joining us in Washington, D.C. So that is basic. So what we're here to do is ask for the BOCC, the Picking County, to adopt a resolution supporting the fee and dividend on carbon. And this, you have an attached resolution. Carbondale has already passed one. We will be planning to pass, like I said, in June. The city of Aspen will do a presentation with them. They know it's in conjunction with some other climate work they are doing. So they will be working on that and passing that in June. And then also, would you consider sending a member to the national conference in Washington, D.C.? This could be very valuable to be as an educational tool to learn what it is that we are doing that is happening at a national level, and they could bring that back here and help Picking County with your preparedness, your resilience.
Resiliency preparedness.
So, so those are, two considerations that we would hope that you would be able to consider in supporting the citizen climate lobby. And
Rachel?
I can take questions, and Mona's here, and actually Chris is here too. And, anybody else wants to chime in, because this is a.
You can go first, George, if you want.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I saw a presentation on this at ACES a while ago, and I guess I still have a few questions, although they're more questions about sharpening the point of the spear than trying to be discouraging. I really think you need a graphic that's a little bit of a decision tree that shows how the progression of someone I will buy the cheaper product. The product is cheaper because they've lowered their carbon use or fossil fuel use, and therefore there's the reduction. But to me, it sounds unfortunately a little too much similar to cap and trade, fee and dividend. It's a new thing under a new name, and I just think of what opponents will do to that. And to me, I need to see it demonstrated as to how it really would work. And I don't see it as a flow chart, or it's hard to think of a graphic, but I do see it as a little bit of a decision tree as to why wouldn't a family just keep doing the exact same thing they've always done? How does the market force work? I mean, you're explaining it verbally, but a lot of people are visual, and they're going to need to see why would this result in these reductions over 20 years? What's that logical progression? And it's just hard to catch that verbally for me. The other thing is, Michael has raised this before in terms of the REMP program, but, and it was my concern, what if people really got used to getting that dividend check every year? And is getting the fee make you feel like your dividend came back, oh great, we're reducing climate, look, I got a check, and how is that connection really made to people as that check starts declining? Their dividend starts declining because it's a good thing. But, with REMP, we still see people willing to pay the mitigation fee, and so that is a question for me. And the other two questions I would just ask is, how would it be quantified of when the carbon is produced? I think you said at the source, so if someone produced enough fuel, they pumped enough oil, is it paid at the oil pumping place? Is it paid at the refinery? And is that, this is 1 ton because it's going to be burned in a super low emissions, high frequency vehicle, high efficiency vehicle, or is this 1 ton because it's going to be used in an old tractor that doesn't? I mean, so how do you fairly quantify? Is the coal burned in a new high efficiency coal burning plant, or is it in one of the older plants? And so how those two questions of equitably distributed, would it be based on family size? Would it be based on the properties they own? Is it based just on being a person? So because someone who perhaps has an income and spends $150,000 a year is going to have been using more of that carbon, than someone with a $25,000 a year. So what does the term equitable mean? And so these are just things that I think help enhance a presentation to be able to ask, because I know what happens when people leave a room at Club 20 or somewhere else and they didn't answer this, or they forgot about that, and they just will try to find ways to shoot holes in the proposal. And those are the types of things I need, or I would need to see to be successful in convincing someone. So I'll just put it there. But again, thank you very much.
I hear you do 4 questions. I will answer your first, and Mona and Chris can answer your second, third, and fourth. So the first one, from first experience, because I'm an independent power producer, and I'm producing clean, renewable energy at 8 cents. Four Corners is also producing at 8 cents. We have a single-phase line that runs directly to the town of Crete, so we are producing directly to that town. Now, the citizens knew that through the co-op. Then their fees were cheaper because the co-op wasn't losing additional line fees. So they were actually given a rebate on their energy bills, because it was actually cheaper, even though they were still paying 13 cents and 30 cents. It was actually cheaper for the co-op for us to send Crete the power as opposed to Four Corners.
Again, I was just saying you need visuals of these things, because there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's one great example. But there's other examples that I think of, like, well, do I buy this item at City Market, and it was shipped in a really heavy cardboard box, and so it took a lot of transportation costs, and this one was in a nice clean plastic bag, and it didn't have the transportation costs, so this product's cheaper than that product. But again, how will it affect people's decision making to be buying the products with the lower carbon?
If I could,
mass market.
Ruthie, if I could jump in here. I've been in my mind comparing the dividend to the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is an oil royalty thing that every resident of Alaska every year gets a check. And I've got a lot of relatives in Alaska, so I'm familiar with some of the things different people in Alaska do. And one thing they'll do, they're hooked on their checks. They really look forward to getting them. But like a family will pool all their checks, and they'll go out and they'll buy a new snow machine or something that uses more oil. And what we need is to have people realize that, okay, a family could take their money and they could do energy upgrades on their house, or they could buy solar collectors, or they could put it towards an electric car or a more fuel efficient car, or something that's going to save them money over and over again forever. And that would be key to having this be able to succeed.
Steve, that's accurate in one sense, but in the other sense, the slide itself says that the fee will help equalize the rising cost of things you're buying because they're paying the carbon fee. And so there might not be any, quote, extra money to do extra things if you're really just keeping pace with the extra $10 a ton a year. And so that's what I'm saying. I think you need some visual examples to show how the logic works in the long term. Or someone will always say, but.
Yeah, I see. I know what you're saying, Rachel. I mean, I've run it through my head a lot of times, looking for the pitfalls.
And I'm not asking for answers for this. I'm looking at our time and everything and thinking we're going to need a bigger and longer discussion, and especially about resolutions. We generally want to vet the numbers. When people give us resolutions with a lot of numbers, we try to vet them a little bit to say, are we sure this is accurate and things like that. I'm very supportive. I want to do anything we can to start changing this. This is why I'm interested in seeing a real tight set of, and maybe the larger lobby has that, but for me to try to explain to a common person, I wouldn't be able to very well.
Yeah, and I think we appreciate that recommendation, and we'd be happy to come back and give you more detailed and more, because graphics, I think I can totally relate to the graphic piece, like where follow the money kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where does it go and
Where's
how does
that?
it get back to you? Yeah.
Who collects it, who dispenses it?
How does it have this desired effect? Okay, thank you very much.
George?
So as we going into 2016, a big election year, at least I know, I think we all know that two of the largest lobbying groups in D.C. are the NRA and oil and gas. And we've seen from this past recent Colorado election, in terms of the money that's just gone into buying campaigns, specifically from the Koch brothers. So when I understand, you want it, it's a bipartisan effort, it's a nonpartisan effort, more accurately stated. But how will you convince the legislators who are in office because of the donations they've received from oil and gas to sign on to this? I mean, what are the incentives for oil and gas companies to agree to this? That's ultimately the goal, because unless they agree to something like imposing a carbon fee on their products, and they're answerable to their stockholders who are looking at their returns on investment. So how do you make that argument?
You make that argument through Hank Paulson. So it has shown in the REMI report, if you read the entire report, it shows how it stimulates the economy. And ultimately, the oil companies will be paying the environmental price for what they're doing. They should have been paying all along. They should have. And they are realizing, they've seen the writing on the wall that indeed they are going to have to start paying for the true price of the production of their carbon. And someone like George Shultz, who was, Secretary Treasurer under Reagan, and he's on the board of Citizens Climate Lobby, and he has the ability, people like George Shultz and Hank Paulson who are saying, so you have true economists who are saying, this is the only solution to so many of our problems, regardless of climate change, to so many of our problems, we need to start doing this. So when you have major economists saying this is the solution that we need to be pursuing, that puts pressure on Americans for Prosperity, any other oil and gas lobbyists that are influencing these members of Congress. And what is happening right now, what CCL has been successful at doing, is working behind the scenes quietly with opposition to the oil and gas taxing, because it's not a tax. And they have Republican senators and congressmen on board with coming forward as a bipartisan effort in this, because they are having to listen to their constituents, which are pressuring them to do this. So you will never get Ted Cruz or Perry, or you're never going to get some of those. But what you will get is you'll get key players, Republican players, and key Democratic players, even from solid coal states. You will get them to come on as an economic solution. So that's, and it showed, it is showing success now, that they're on board.
Obviously, that's the biggest challenge.
It is. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Which is why we find common ground. It's very respectful. It's finding common ground, and we're making progress. The momentum's built.
I'll be interested to see what sort of commitment in the near future you'll get from our congressional representatives.
Yeah, I mean, we've got two really tough ones.
Yeah.
We have Bennett's on board, but we have two really tough ones, and when we're making progress with them.
Yeah.
We are definitely making progress. And in June, I can give you an update on the progress that we are making with them. Because we've essentially been able to take it out of the conversation of climate change, which is, a dead end. It's like we're on the Titanic and everybody's arguing about what
Are we gonna
dress
sink or
attire
swim?
they should wear to the ballroom. It takes it out of that conversation and it puts it into a social economic conversation. And that one they cannot deny. They cannot deny that creating jobs and health benefits and national security, those are all serious issues that need to be addressed.
Thanks. Patty?
I think we do need further discussion. I think we need to look at the reso, do some wordsmithing. There's some stuff that I think needs to be cleaned up to make me more comfortable, just basic word things. But, and I think we should probably have some time to do that. Again, put that on
In a
your
future
list.
work session.
Yeah, this is like, this is meat for a whole half an hour or an hour or something, or several meetings down the road, and we do need to move on our agenda. We got more people waiting. Last
real
comments
quick.
and questions.
One of the last other things I think that you should try to find a way to address is the coal-dependent or oil and gas-dependent producing counties, because they're the ones who are going to be so economically hit. And we've even seen it at the state legislature this year where they're trying to direct more money out of the state budget so that these counties can reinvent themselves and have an economy. And not all of them can suddenly become solar installers or this sort of thing. And so at the national level, maybe that's part of where some of the fee goes, is to how do you get these communities to reinvent themselves. Because then there's a lot less hostility. If you know you're going to transition from this to this as your local economy, that's one thing. Right now, it just looks like an abyss for all those people.
Yeah. Also,
There is a study happening at the state level that will really break out county by county how it will impact everything. And once we have those hard numbers, then that will help us.
And I'm just used to dealing with the National Association of Counties and so many resistant models there.
Also, I'm in my mind, I'm like, well, what if a coal company or a gas company finds another use for the coal that doesn't involve burning it? Or if they find a way to remove all the CO2 from the stack when they burn coal, somehow that has to be factored in, and they need to be rewarded for that.
Everything, all those need to happen.
Yeah, so that's a big part of the equation too, and I'm sure economists are thinking through those things.
So just from the staff's perspective, I want to be sure I'm clear on how we want to proceed. So we're going to schedule another work session to go over specifically the resolution and see if we can get the wording to a point where the board wants to put it on a regular agenda. And I would assume that you'd want representatives from the Citizens Climate Lobby also at that meeting for that discussion.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay, so we can get that scheduled.
And one more question, if a board member would like to attend the June National Conference?
We'll have to look at our schedules and stuff.
So if there's a board member interested in attending, if you could contact me, and then I can let representatives from the Citizens Climate Lobby know.
It'd be helpful to know when early registration is over and probably.
It's $99 for the conference.
Yeah. And then
Wow.
hotels in DC.
Yeah. Small detail.
Yeah. That sounds exciting.
No campgrounds either.
Yeah, it's a carbon neutral $99.
You want to camp in DC at the end of June.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot
for
for
thanks
coming in
everybody.
and all your work. It really has gained a lot of momentum in the valley. That's quite clear. I really appreciate that.
All right, where are we?
Open discussion.
Oh.
Facilities.
Okay, moving on our agenda. Next up, our own Jody Smith talking about facilities update.
I know I saw Jody. Oh,
She's
there she
here.
is. The pillar, I couldn't see beyond.
Jody, I want you to know I figured out how to get to the library and back.
Did you see our little signs?
No, I went through the parking lot.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me again. It's your second weekly update of the library expansion project. And there's not a whole lot to report this week except for that we're moving along. The peel back and the removal of those walls going very smooth this week. They're coming out pretty well. We've got some new equipment in there, cutting those walls down, making a lot of progress. They're also taking off the face of the library wall back there, so that's all coming off. And coordination with the city continues to go well. Their work is moving along too. And there's just really not a whole lot to report, and that's good news, right?
Very good news.
You haven't struck oil or anything, or water?
The Aspen Sanitation did locate the 911 line that we were worried in that alley. We were worried, concerned that it might get hit. They did locate that. It's encased in concrete. So we know that's been found and that they know where it is and how to work around it. So that's good news. And short and sweet today. I did want to let you all know that we are posting a weekly update, and the public can go to that as well. And it's on the Pickens County Library's website, pickolibrary.com, piccolib.com. So if you go to that website, there's an actual update with photographs. It tells you what's coming up for the week, what the impacts to the public are. So if it's going to be super noisy, or if there's going to be vibrations because of the chains or the sawing and that kind of thing. So is that PitLib?
I will find it here in a second.
But there's some really great pictures out there of what they're doing. So if the public wants to know what's going on behind the fences, feel free to go to that website and check it out if you want to know what the impacts are as well. Any questions?
And I just note for the public, if you just go to pickingcounty.com,
Okay.
you can link to the library page from there.
Very good.
Under departments.
I was just thinking about, if we start opening the wall up, it's actually a really good time of year to be doing that because it's warmer weather and we don't have to worry about all the heat escaping. But then, when is it going to be closed in? So, will it be closed in by winter?
Yes.
So then the heat's not escaping from the library next winter?
Yes. So our goal right now is that by July 4th, or the weekend after July 4th, that we will have the slabs down, all the groundwork will be done, and we will starting to erect the structure. And so I would expect us to be pretty closed in by September. So, and then we'll start to go inside with some of the renovation scope that we can get in on inside as well.
One last question I had. Jody, is the library, do they know yet if they're going to need to use the power plant for some book storage and operations, or they still are intending that?
We are still intending that.
Okay.
We have a bid opening this week on Thursday, so we'll know what the cost of that is. We're still waiting for the lease from the City of Aspen, so that once we have that lease, we can start that process. I believe all leases come to the Board of County Commissioners, so you guys that will come before you, so you'll see what's in there and get permission for that. We're really hoping that by the second or third week of May, we're moving. So it's going to come fast as soon as we know, and by then we'll have some other details worked out. But that's our intent right now.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Okay.
Great, thanks, Jody.
Thank you. See you next week.
Yeah,
Put that hard at
we'll be here.
Okay, telemedicine update. John.
Yeah, so I just wanted to let the board know that we are going to be launching a pilot project later this week, and it has to do with our efforts around healthcare. And the pilot is around telemedicine. And to give you a little bit of background on this, as we went through and we did our health risk assessments, and we've been collecting information about how our employees get, or in some cases don't get, health care, one of the things that we learned is that a large number of our employees and dependents that are on our health plan do not have a primary care physician. And one of the things that we suspect is that part of that is there's just difficulty accessing, when people are traveling. So oftentimes 60% of our employees live outside of Pickens County, and so you're splitting between mid-valley or down-valley locations and maybe working up-valley. And we think time and convenience is probably a barrier. As well as looking for opportunities to bring down costs. And so telemedicine is not new. It's something that is offered as a product by a number of companies. The reason we haven't done it in the past is that most of the companies have doctors hired somewhere else. So maybe in the Midwest or on the East Coast or the West Coast, wherever they can put a group of doctors together at the lowest cost, and those doctors who are out of state can't actually practice medicine, so it's more of an advisory service. We have been put in touch through the Health Alliance and our broker Lockton with a startup company here in Colorado called Otto Health, OTTO. You're going to be seeing that name a lot, hopefully over the next few weeks. That's trying a different model of telemedicine. And what it is they've built a platform that will work on our smartphones, our tablets, our computers, to provide telemedicine. And the innovative thing about it is they're building a network of Colorado, and more specifically working to build a network of local doctors, so that when you access the service, let's say you're coming in because maybe you've feeling the symptoms of a flu coming on or such, they can actually diagnose and treat. They can write you that prescription right from the application, or refer you to higher levels of care if that's appropriate. And they can also act to help triage. One of the things that's happening is as our employees don't have relationships with primary care physicians, when they do need care or think they need care, they're accessing it at higher levels. Sometimes that's through an emergency room. Sometimes it's through a specialist, where it's not getting the right, most efficient and effective level of care right away. The visits will be charged at $20 a visit, so it's actually a cost savings. If you're on a high deductible health plan right now and you go directly to your primary care physician, typically you're going to be charged anywhere from $150 to $180. They've got basically a model where it's what's called a capitated payment. They're paying the doctors a certain amount regardless of whether they've got patients in or not, and their feeling is they get enough volume on a per member per month basis, you pay a certain amount. We're actually getting it for free for this initial period, because they're testing their technology and their business model, and we're testing whether this works for our employees. We do still, because of Affordable Care Act rules, have to charge a copay for those services, the doctor services. But it's going to be something that we're going to be looking to launch later this week. Employees, you all, will be getting an email inviting you to sign up. You can download, it'll give you instructions to download an app on your smart device, whatever that may be, or on the computer. And we will have some local docs initially. It'll start off with a couple local docs. Many want to kind of see how the technology works, so where we don't have a local doctor scheduled, there will be a Colorado doctor, probably from the Front Range, who will be available and is still licensed to practice here and can actually call in prescriptions and that sort of thing. Anytime you use this telemedicine pilot, records will go, if you do have a primary care physician. If it's not yours that's available on the line, records of your visit and any treatments will go to them as well as to you. So it's an experiment that we're trying through the VHA and the county to just see if we can look at a different, more efficient model to access health care and build an infrastructure for our local doctors to connect in a different way with our employees. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
George and then Michael.
So you'll have some local doctors, and they'll be identified, so you'll know who those doctors are.
Yep.
And then you'll have, if they're not available or the demand is such that you'll get hooked up to another physician in Colorado. I guess my question is how will they really know without seeing you what is really going on with you? I could just see that a lot of people will be calling in, well, I've got this symptom or that symptom, and the doctor's trying to figure out, what are all the possibilities. And so how would they be able to prescribe something without actually seeing?
Yeah, in the cases where they're not confident that they're able to make a diagnosis without, either by, visually seeing, and everything will be in high definition video and through discussion, they're going to be referring you to go to an on-site location. The individual that developed this, Dr. Michael Giese, who we'll get up here at some point to talk to you guys, is an internist. And as he's explained it to us, really, even in his own practice, 80% or better of what he sees, he can diagnose through visually and through talking to the patient. The other 20% oftentimes takes a higher level of referral or labs or those sorts of things. And so where that's the case, the telemedicine is not going to be, but it at least will be a triage then to say, hey, this may be something where you need to get lab work done or palpitated or something else. And in that case, they're going to refer. But really for a number of the things that our employees may be accessing primary care for, that can be done, they believe, and that's why it's an experiment and a pilot. We're going to see if it works. What's attractive to us is there's no initial cost to us to participate in the pilot. It's something that our goals aligned in terms of looking for different, more effective ways of delivering and paying for health care. They've got a product they want to test, and we were the first group that was willing to sit down with them and say, our goals align, and so we get this 6-month pilot. And so we'll have measures, George, about access and how many were referred, how many were able to be treated, what would our cost have been in our old model versus our cost under their business model. And we'll be able to compare those things and see if this is something that maybe we should expand. Incidentally, we are putting them in touch with other employers, including they're going to talk to ACRA and the other VHA members, because it can be more broadly available to folks.
I think it'd be interesting to see
Michael.
how it goes.
That was my question. Are all the members of the Valley Health Alliance just the county?
Right now, just the county, and it looks like the hospital may also participate. 2 other employers are already signed up with telemedicine providers. Not with those providers don't use local docs, and so as an existing service that they purchased. And so I think they're going to wait and see how this pilot goes. But we're working with other employers who might be interested in piloting it also.
Thank you. We've got to keep trying some new things and bring costs down, which we've been seeing, yet at the same time make sure that it's a really good, viable option that people feel comfortable with, they don't feel shortchanged with in some way. So the questions I would have kind of going forward, John, would be how do we then incentivize those employees who do not have a real live primary care physician to get one? And I don't know that that's through, human resources to think about the structure of our benefit plans and things like that. But I wouldn't want this to become a crutch that people could just use to say, I've got a cold, get me some antibiotics, but I still haven't been doing my blood work for the past 5 years. I still don't see a regular primary care physician, things like that. So I think that's two different tracks, but it's really important. And then the other issue I would really be concerned about is making sure through our new IT and BITS department will people really be assured the privacy that they need? I would, you read every other day about somebody getting hacked or iPhones getting hacked or viruses being put on and data being transmitted. I just had a bad credit card charge out of Victorville, California show up on one of my cards at a 7-Eleven station, and that card's never left my top dresser drawer. So, I kind of go, there's a little nervousness there if somebody's driving down, or sitting at their home on their iPhone or their iPad and do they have the privacy that they would normally expect in a physician's office? And the other thing is just, and it's it's not a good or a bad, but will the physician you talk to have access to your electronic records? Will they be able to say, well, your blood work for the past 3 years shows your potassium's through the roof, or your sodium's through the roof. That's why you're having this problem. How much is it just the visual and the look without having that medical history that doctors always, oh, you're allergic to penicillin, oh, you're, this or that. So how do the history go with these folks? So those are my questions, and I'm sure you can explain it.
Well, let me, so we've done some due diligence. All of the technical issues in terms of privacy and medical record privacy, as well as the privacy of the interaction, those are issues that are governed under HIPAA, the Health Information something protection privacy and Act, and the application is HIPAA compliant. And so, as with any system where you're keeping records, paper isn't perfect, electronics aren't perfect, there's risks, but the application is HIPAA compliant, meaning that it has the encryption and it has all the required securities that have been deemed sufficient to protect privacy. That said, no system's perfect, and neither is the fax or paper processes that we use. But we have looked into that, and we've actually had their letters from their attorney on their review, and it's HIPAA compliance with that. In terms of electronic medical records, we haven't cracked that nut. If you go into a physician's office, or you're accessing the physician via a technology tool like that, much of the information is still going to be what you verbally provide to the physician as background. Now, in order to make sure that that information is shared, if you do have a primary care physician, the record of that interaction is going to be shared between the auto doctor and your primary care physician. For many of our employees, there is no primary care physician, so there is no real record to fall back on other than the discussion and such. And so until we've got a common electronic medical record that goes across all providers, we may not crack that nut that you're talking about. So it will be incumbent on our employees, just as it is when they go to visit the doctor, if they haven't had that established relationship. And my guess is, Rachel, what we're going to learn is for those that do have an established relationship with a doctor, they'll probably be lower utilizers of this service as our guess. Again, we'll see.
I just see this as being something that would be used by people when there's an acute care situation. I really have a fever, I'm really experiencing this or something. But, in terms of promoting the long-term goal of better wellness so there's less medical utilization, I don't see that happening, because you're not going to talk to someone about your lifestyle and your eating choices and your this and your that, and everything that you normally get from
Well, what we see that's different, and again, why we think this is an important pilot, is the more local docs we have available, the more opportunities there are for our employees to build a relationship, even if it's through an acute care situation, because I would expect that part of that interview, one was the last time you're in for a checkup, one was, and then that relationship can be built. We do incentivize our employees after the health fairs. We, provide an incentive to bring a lab, and the goal there was to try and establish a relationship. We're continuing to do that. We think this is another opportunity. If the telemedicine project were with doctors who weren't in our community, then I'd say there's no opportunity that it's going to develop a relationship. But what caught my attention and why we thought this was a good thing to test was that they're building a network of local docs, and we have the opportunity then for our employees to build a relationship with a local practice if they participate in our pilot.
Okay.
So I don't know, can't guarantee it's going to work. You might be right.
Yeah. No,
We'll see.
I understand, especially in rural communities, this is really going to be about some of the only treatment they have.
Right.
Options, so.
Right.
Okay.
So more to come on that. Just wanted you guys to have a heads up on where it's coming from before the emails started going out.
Thanks.
I think behind the pillar,
We have John Ely there.
John Ely. We're probably ready to talk about the letter if you want to.
I think a copy of the proposed letter was handed out to the board. If you don't have it or didn't get it, we've got copies here.
This is which letter would you?
Is it this one?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's a
John, I'll take a hard copy from you.
Let me see if I.
What's the subject of this? Letter to the Colorado Water Conservation Board?
Right.
Do you want to, Michael?
Okay.
I think I got one.
It's a proposed letter to the CWCB in regards to the Colorado Water Plan. It addresses the issue of land use planning and land use development in general as it relates to water conservation. Conservation being a recognized key to reconciling the supply gap, so to speak, as it's referred to in the water plan and other documents as we see demand increasing and supplies diminishing. The letter does not propose anything in particular, but it highlights the issue to the CWCB and requests an increased attention be given to this particular topic. The intent of the letter was to be signed off on, I believe Rachel mentioned this actually a meeting or two ago, to be signed off on by an equal number of county jurisdictions on the Front Range and the West Slope, and to have those letters go in together to the CWCB during their comment period, which extends to the end of this month. However, it looks like from the form of the letter, I haven't had a chance to talk to the letter's author yet. This is produced through QQ, that we have 5 counties at least ostensibly going to sign off on this, in addition to Pitkin, Eagle, and Summit. It looks like Grand and Park counties would be also participating. On the Front Range, I'm not sure what the complement would be, although I've heard that it was anticipated that it would be the city and county of Denver, Boulder County, and I believe
City and County of Broomfield.
Broomfield,
yeah. At any rate, the letter is pretty much set as far as the form of it goes, simply because all these various jurisdictions will be reviewing the same content and then signing off on the same letter. So the opportunity to really amend the wording is not present for us or any of the other jurisdictions. And as a consequence, there is necessarily a somewhat of a lack of specificity, but a unified voice to increase the awareness of the importance of appropriate land use planning, particularly if the state demographer is correct and the state is looking at a population growth in 2050 of another 5 or more million people. So, any questions?
Yeah, I believe Charlotte sent this out at the end of last week to us.
I think so.
And as I kind of mentioned during open comments before, we may, as a county or the West Slope, want to see, more stringent language or more concrete items. And it's been an attempt to create consensus, which is difficult between the two areas. This process started in the fall with a meeting. I went to Castle Rock and met with what was called CMAC, the Front Range County Commissioners and Mayors, and talked in general about water and asked them if they would like to have a further dialogue about water, and they said yes. And the next meeting was up in Summit County, and then we contributed as QQ members to hiring a facilitator, and we began a process of facilitated meetings. And at a certain point, a number of the counties on the Front Range became concerned that, wait a second, land use planning, are you trying to stop a Trans Mountain diversion with land use planning? Can't happen. We don't want anything to do with that. Or, the whole local control movement was so strong and perhaps fearful that it is not going to be a letter with the CMAC group. But there were other counties within that area. These second page, what we call the water sensitive land use planning those 6 bullet points, those 6 items, probably took a meeting and a half to reach consensus on what that language would be sufficient and what it could do. But so a decision was made to say, well, there's a lot of value that's come out of this. Let's go forward and do it as a county-to-county measure rather than the CMAC group, because CMAC works on 100% agreement, not just majority or general consensus. Can you live with it? Any one objector from any one county board can say, no, we don't want to participate. And so, as I said yesterday or last week, we really can't change the language without going back to 5 other groups and probably missing the first of the May deadline. So I'm really asking my board's indulgence in saying that this is at least a solid effort to try to influence that water plan to be much more diligent about land use planning. As it stands right now, I think the land use planning section is maybe 3 or 4 pages long in the entire water plan. And then individual basins have a potential of land use within their basin implementation plan, but most of them have not really put anything in. And the Colorado Basin is the only basin that has actually chosen the high conservation values as opposed to low to moderate or just plain moderate. And so, again, this is just part of a public comment process, and we're hopeful it will lead to something and give the state a little more direction to up and to elevate that section of the plan.
Sure.
Yeah, Rachel, first, thanks for all your work and this, your time commitment. I know that's a lot, so thank you. Just going through this, I mean, I would support us signing on and moving this forward. It is fairly soft, but it has some suggestions in terms of water systems, in and outdoor water savings ideas and things like that. Do you think the CWCB will receive an opposing letter? It's hard to say.
I thought about that a little as well, and perhaps, but at the same time, what does that letter say? We think we should use water as wastefully as we want to, or we don't think land use planning has anything to do with narrowing the gap or the supply. I don't know that they can, and we'll just have to see. I think there's going to be a lot of comments from a lot of folks anyhow that are just going to be all, let's get that Trans Mountain diversion done as soon as possible. I mean, there's just going to be a huge array of public comment.
Yeah. So
Are you
I've read through it all, and it seems well organized, and like you say, we can't wordsmith it at this point. That's been done thanks to all the efforts. And
well, and this is what part of why I wanted to make sure we were offering our individual Pickens County comments as well, that, this is an agreement here, and then other things would be more specific to us through Aspen and the joint letter and even our own comments. So-
Yeah, I think it's, again, what George said, you put in a lot of time and effort on water, and I think this is well done. It's a little softer than, of course, we would want, but I think we should just move forward and get it out there.
Michael?
Would you recommend sending this letter?
Certainly.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll coordinate with the other entities that are signing out to the letter. I thought that we were doing an individual letter per jurisdiction, but it looks like really this is set up for multiple signatures, so however that flows the best, we'll coordinate. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Other open discussion?
I have one.
I have nothing, but John usually goes first if he has anything, but.
Patty, go ahead.
John might have more. Do you have more?
I can hold on mine.
I just have a real quick one. I just have to voice this. ACRA's recent decision to lobby against the city's ballot question, referendum 1, about the variances. I'm not going to get into the issue of whether ACRA has the legal right, I believe they do, to do what they're doing. I just think it would have been more appropriate if they had polled all of their members, at least let them know they were making this decision and moving in that direction. And being part of Northwest Colorado Council of Governments for as many years, Northwest COG did not take a political position without contacting all of their members, and had to have 100% of member approval or disapproval to move forward. Needless to say, COG never supported a political issue because of that. But granted, it would have been a tough decision to try and get members, all of the ACRA members, to get back to them. But I still think some kind of letter or something letting members know that they were moving in this direction would have been appropriate. I just needed to say that because it was bothersome to me.
I've got two.
Thank you for letting me vent that.
There you go.
I got two small items. One is more an announcement. Tomorrow there's a quarterly meeting of the Western Slope Veterans Coalition at CMC Building in Carbondale, and it is at noon. And the meeting part lasts about an hour, and then they're doing some training after that. But I was planning on going to that, partly to talk about transportation coordination to get veterans to medical appointments is one of the things I've been involved in a little bit. So
Thanks for doing that.
the second thing, did the rest of you get a letter from Jim and Jill Pomeroy regarding the housing thing? And I think we should probably respond to it. I just wanted to discuss, like, who would be the one to respond to it. Did you get that letter, John?
I haven't gotten a copy of that, no.
It's a very lengthy letter,
and just came out.
No, I'll send it
you
to
didn't
you.
get it.
I can send it
we
to
could
him.
forward it to you. But I think they have a misconception about what it was we voted on.
I don't know if they have a
discussed with,
misperception. It was, honestly, hard cases make for hard decisions, and they were asking to reconsider the priority for move down and move up for readdressing occupancy. And it's just, I have a hard time knowing how to respond. They had a unit and then had to sell it for financial difficulties, and are emphasizing that it will be very hard or harder for them to get back into the program now. I think some of the consolation there is that we modified it so that it does not apply to new projects, and there is the potential that it would get more of the larger units back on the market that a family like theirs could enter lotteries for. And I didn't think that they seem to realize that there already is a small advantage for people based on their length of residency in the community in terms of getting their name into the lottery. But it was a response to our joint meeting with the Aspen City Council when we went forward with that change. And I don't know if anyone wants to move to reconsider that and to try to bring that back up for one more time. As I kind of said before, I think it's worth a try. You know, one of the other complicating factors that they have is that they have a dog, and so far less dog units become available than others. And it's really hard to look at in a classic sense, because I sometimes still see units for sale, whether it's at Woody Creek or other places, and so sometimes it's about preference of where I want to be versus what's available and you could have if you wanted to. So I just see them in very much the same boat as everyone who's seeking housing in our community. So I don't know if it's a reconsideration of that priority that people want to participate in. I know you were not at the meeting, Michael, when we talked about it last.
Did you get the letter?
But wouldn't the process be to go to the APSHA board and say, we'd like you to reconsider this? And then the APSHA board would bring it to the two. So it really isn't a direct, something we have direct control over anyway. So I think that would be the letter. Listen, these rules are originated and endorsed by the APSHA board, and we further endorse them, but the place to start for a reconsideration is at the APSHA board.
Yeah, and I actually think the changes we talked about are good. It allows people who are either needing to downsize or who are bursting at the seams needing a bigger unit can get that, and then their unit they're moving out of is freed up to go into the pool. So it's not actually giving a priority to a family already in a unit is not removing housing from the system. It's just shifting it so the unit they're in would then become available. And I think that addresses the main concern of the Pomeroys. They thought they were going to be aced out by completely. George?
I mean, I don't really agree with that statement, Steve, but because if someone has a family that's growing, and they're in deed restricted now, they're going to want to move up to a larger unit. And if someone similarly who wants to get into the system and needs a large unit, they are competing against someone who's already has a leg up. So I don't agree with that statement, and that's why I brought that up. But I think Michael's right. You know, this is a concern. I responded to them as I respond to any time someone sends me a letter in terms of just providing them the information that happened at that meeting. But if we want to send sort of a broader letter saying, well, the place to start is with the APSHA board, and here's the process, because from the APSHA board, then they would make recommendations to the joint Aspen City Council elected officials.
So should we have John do that?
Yeah, I could respond, simply saying, we forwarded these concerns to the APSHA board because, this is their governance role and how it works.
That we discussed it as a board. And, yeah.
I can do that.
Okay. And
I just got the email.
Yep. You sent it to them? Okay.
Yep.
I sent it right.
So we
right
don't
next
want to
to
all send you another copy.
He's got it. He's got it.
Okay. Let's see. We probably better get on to board reports and.
I've got another discussion, Steve.
Oh,
I think maybe
sorry.
John does too. Didn't you have your hand up first off the bat?
No, I'm going to wait on mine. So
Okay, George.
Rachel mentioned this, I think last week, is that we've got a city election coming up. Ballots have gone out. I've had the opportunity actually just to watch some of the candidates on Grassroots. I want to thank Grassroots for doing the sponsoring Probe Line, and also acknowledge and thank Brent Gardner-Smith as a moderator, who's I think has done a tremendous interview process. So if anybody really wants to get a better glimpse of the candidates versus just sort of a 2-minute spiel on these debates, an hour-long interview with the candidates on Grassroots is well worth seeing. But I bring this up because I heard several candidates bring up this point, and I think that we should clarify this point, not only for the candidates, but also for the public. And that is, I've heard several times when a question towards a candidate poses a question in terms of should the city be looking at expanding their facilities and because of the size of the facilities and the place. Several candidates have responded. One reason why the city has to look at expansion is because the county is kicking the police department out of their facilities. And I think that is grossly misunderstood and misstated. So I thought we'd have John give a brief understanding and explanation of what is really happening concerning the Aspen Police Department.
Yeah.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, and I know a few of you have raised this concern now that you're hearing this out there and people are approaching you with it. And but by way of background, I guess first, no, we are not kicking the police department out of the courthouse. But what is true is that we can no longer accommodate their needs, I think, as an entity. And so by way of background, for some time now, I think this started maybe back in the mid-'80s. I'm not sure when our partnership on space started, but we've had a partnership where we've provided space for the police department, and the city provides space for our community development department. And over the course of that partnership, nothing was ever really put in writing, nothing was ever documented. It's something that we did as part of our partnership. And as the needs of law enforcement have changed, and they've changed for both of our entities. They've changed, I think, for the sheriff's department quite a bit. They've changed for the police department. I think as a practical matter, we've had both of those law enforcement functions in the same building. Well, we've had the sheriff there for at least 130 years, the police not quite as long. But over that time, the demands of law enforcement have changed significantly, and the requirements of law enforcement. Most recently, requirements to hold on to evidence, particularly DNA evidence in perpetuity. All of these things drive space needs. And so we found ourselves in the position in 2013 with both the police and sheriff looking for additional space. The police had more immediate needs. When we looked at the square footage at that time, we were roughly 3,000 square feet. We're roughly 3,400 square feet now of the old courthouse occupied by the police department, about 1,800 square feet occupied by community development. And we did say at that point, guys, we need to enter into something, and we need to memorialize our agreements somehow. And we're probably at the limit of what we can continue to provide. If you continue to have needs for additional space for the police department, it may be best for us to try and figure out how we're going to accommodate those needs, for our own departments, comm, dev versus police. And we entered in between the managers into an MOU at that point, just stating, okay, here's our agreement around increased space. And the only statement really in there is if in the future the city provides space for the police department, we agree to move community development out of City Hall, vice versa, at such point that we get space for community development, the city would agree to move APD. There are no dates, no specific deadlines set, and so, and that was purposeful because we didn't have plans in place at that point, and it wouldn't serve the public for us to be putting the police department out of their facilities with no other place to go, and vice versa. I think the city recognized it doesn't serve the public for community development to be removed from City Hall. And so I'm happy to share a copy of that. That was done between the managers to try and start to get some structure around this trading of space as we're increasing space. But no, there's no deadline set by the county. That said, Is there, a legitimate business need, and can the county accommodate that for the police? I believe there is, and no, I don't believe the county does have space to accommodate that need going forward. Does that answer your question, George, or is that way too long?
There's also, what I've heard here is that when we go ahead with building our new public safety building, which will allow the sheriff's department to get the space that they need and also provide ComDev to move over, and that by 2018, that the police department will need to look for a new space.
Those were targets that we set, George, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the police department and sheriff's department both have legitimate needs for additional space. And we've never written down a date, we've never given notice, but we did sit down and talk about, jointly planning projects so that we would know what to expect in terms of timelines of each other. And so as we went through our budgeting process and we set up, our plans to try and invest in facilities, that's where that 2018-2019 date is probably coming from. Similarly, I think the city set goals for their own projects to try and address their needs. They are losing lease space across Hopkins, where their building department, I think several other city departments. That is a real loss of space that's happening on a very specific deadline that needs to be addressed. And so that might be also where the 2018-2019 timelines came from. I raised concerns about this messaging with city staff, and we're going to be sitting down to kind of clarify that messaging going forward. But there's nothing that we've given the city at this point that gives a deadline of 2018 or 2019. Like I said, I can share what we've got with you, if the board's interested. All that said, both projects I think are addressing a real need in the community.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you, George, for raising that. I think that's really important. Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that candidates will say what candidates will say, and it's often a lot of shorthand. I'm not excusing it, but people do tend to do that. What I would like to note is that, there was a time period when the city and county were both a lot smaller and a lot less complex world, where the goal was a lot of joint departments, and that the sense was that there would be money saving. And so even the beginning of the building department being all over in City Hall, we had one planning director at that time, and it was Diane Moore, was in both the city and the county's, ComDev director for both as a joint department. And similar to IT, perhaps, we found that you really just can't serve two masters well. And one side or the other was always feeling they were being shortchanged a little bit in the types of services. And there was really challenges, particularly when there were things around the urban growth boundary, as to whose side of the story should that planning director take, or where their interests lie. So we've kind of slowly seen a number of those departments need to move apart for just like IT, so we could really see the county's needs well served. But beyond that, I was still back on city council, which would be a full 9 years ago, 10 years ago, when Hillary was the county manager, and the plans for new county space were being presented at that time. And it's a lot more than we're looking at now. But so the city has been well aware that the county is really out of facilities. And at that point in time, Michael may remember, the plan and the question was, do you want the county to stay in downtown Aspen, or do you want the county to move out to Public Works? Because we have a lot more land there, and it's a lot less expensive, and we could sell our in-town building And the city councils at that time were very adamant that, you know, having the county in the county seat in the city of Aspen was important to the community. It was important to off-season business and buying lunch and coffee and, you know, being here, and that it would be an inconvenience for a lot of city residents to have to go out to the Airport Business Center and create more traffic. Now, of course, we know a lot of county residents might prefer not to have to come into town, but it was a decision that was made to not move county facilities out to the Airport Business Center. So that the county was short on space and the county needed space has just not been a secret for a long time. And what seems to have really pulled this forward in two senses was tragically the murder investigation from last year, where we saw that an old courthouse facility it doesn't have adequate infrastructure for interview rooms or from keeping witnesses apart from each other physically, protecting the identity of folks, storing evidence, as you said, John, dealing with the media crush, and the beautiful old building built for communities in the 1800s that didn't have electronic equipment needs, filing report needs, and all those sort of things. So I think it's developed over time, but it's not been intentional. And, you know, I also was back with the city a long time ago when they were developing their space needs issues, and we added a basement to City Hall. We remodeled the whole building and remodeled other offices and put them over in the yellow brick and put them in the ice garden. So, you know, it's kind of disappointing in a sense that they've outgrown what they have now, but I'm not on the city council and I don't question their space needs, but every time there was something that came up, it was generally kind of automatically rejected that the city's getting too big. And one of the easiest ones I remember was out at the golf course, where they, you know, not even the golf course, but to the side of the golf course where they have the Parks and Open Space building on the edge of Cemetery Lane. And it's like, how do you think we're going to care for all these beautiful parks and lands and waterways and everything if we don't have a place to keep the trail sweepers and the lawn mowers and the, you know, fill dirt? So every time the city does need more space, and they take about as little as they can get by with, hopefully, and but it's an anti-growth town, and candidates will then spin that into my position is we don't need more space, and once you sit in the seat for about 2 years, you'll realize how badly the space is needed. So that's just my editorial comment.
Steve, I have to leave, so I apologize.
Yeah, so actually the P&Z is supposed to be in here in about 12 minutes, so.
We'll have to do the board reports next
I
time.
think
Nothing's
we did
happened.
short the board reports again till another time, and
Then I can report on the workforce
Motion
meeting.
to adjourn.
yeah, I'll accept that motion to adjourn.